Alright, yeah, I get it. It's been a while. Turns out that while writing a video about Disco Elysium, you end up becoming a little bit of Harry Dubois yourself. And no, I'm not going to go into detail about that part, but overall, yeah, I'm sorry for the wait. I had finals and stuff, and this video was quite a doozy to write in the first place, on top of all the other things going on in my life. I'm going to be going over a... I said short in the script, it's not short, but a history of Zaum, the company that made Disco Elysium, what happened in the company when the original creators were ousted, and then what happened after they were thrown out, and a bit of a lowdown on some of the spiritual successor companies that have popped up after Zaum's fall from grace and what they're currently working on right now. A bit of a disclaimer before I start, I'm not an investigative journalist, I do not have many first-hand accounts from this stuff, and I wasn't able to get in contact with anyone who is or was working at Zaum. I tried a little bit, but I don't feel nearly qualified enough to go poking around and asking questions to what is most likely some very, very, very busy people. And I'm sorry if I got any details wrong in the writing of this video. I will try to make corrections in the comments where I can, but this is a whole heck of a lot to go over, and I'm probably bound to slip up on some of the details. But overall, please do not go and harass anyone involved with anything I mention here. Feel free to come to your own conclusions about certain people, but this is an infotainment-focused video. I'm not going to make any broad sweeping claims about anyone's character who is involved with this. We're all human, except for the bourgeois. Alright, enough faffing about, let's get into this. If you somehow stumbled upon this video and have no idea what Disco Elysium is, 1, why are you watching this? And 2, please stay, this video doesn't really spoil much, if anything, about the actual game. Disco Elysium is the brainchild of Robert Kurvitz, released on October 5th, 2019, Jesus Christ, that was 6 years ago, to critical acclaim and financial success, where it held the #1 spot on PC Gamer's best games of all time, only being overtaken by Baldur's Gate 3 on its release. None of this really tells you what Disco Elysium actually is as a game, though. It's a bit hard to put into words for someone who hasn't seen it, but basically imagine that you wake up with the worst hangover of your life, zero memory of who or where you are, stumble your way to the bottom floor of a mediocre hostel, only to be side-eyed by half the residents there, approached by a very handsome and serious policeman where he blindsides you with news that you're also a cop, and you're supposed to be solving a murder case. The body's in the backyard hung on a tree. Better get it down pretty quickly, it's starting to stink. Good luck. You then spend the rest of the game chasing down a strange murder mystery while getting to know the world, yourself, and the residents of the poor coastal district of Martinez. The gameplay is that of an isometric RPG with a good amount of mechanics lifted from the TTRPG scene, with each of your skills each having an individual voice to themselves that pipe up more and more as you invest points into each one, rolling various skill checks to perform different actions that can be easier or more difficult based on what skills you choose to focus on. For example, you can smack the shit out of a raging racist by leveling up your physical instrument skill, using your raw strength to overpower an absolute brick shithouse of a man. Or you can take a more diplomatic approach and use your conceptualization, a kind of artsy intellect-based skill that allows you to view various perspectives on the world and hear him out on his insane racist ramblings in order to get past him. There's countless examples of this, and it's the main way of interfacing with the world of Disco Elysium. The game plays more like an interactive book than anything else. You spend most of your time reading, or as of the final cut, listening to the amazing voice acting and narration. Luckily, this game is arguably some of the best writing ever presented in a video game, the voices in your head and the intriguing cast of characters all providing a phenomenal soundtrack to the world of Elysium, one that is likely to remain lingering on your mind for years to come. At least that's the case for me, or some of the thousands of die-hard fans of the Disco Elysium world. I highly recommend you give this game a shot at some point if you haven't. This video isn't going to spoil much at all about it, and it's primarily focused around catching people up on the circumstances surrounding the game. But I mean, I'm not doing this just out of journalistic integrity. I love Disco, and many other people do too. I don't know how much I can recommend buying the game, but I do recommend playing it in any way you can. Wink wink, nudge nudge. I'm not saying anything at all, just don't listen to me, don't worry about it, just play the game, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum, all that. So let's just jump into it. Disco Elysium started development as a video game in 2014, but the bones of Elysium were created far before that. The dates are difficult to come by, which is going to be a repeated point in this video. Sorry, my sources aren't the most concrete. A lot of this information comes from various artists reflecting on some tough times in their life, so substances got fairly involved fairly often and the details get fuzzy here and there. I'm fairly confident on the validity of a lot of these statements though, but I will mention when I'm not so sure about something. Anyway, it all starts with a group of punk rock-inspired Estonian teens who go by the Overcoats. A lot of the future writers of Disco Elysium were in this group, with Kurvitz running the helm as the primary game master for what they would spend a lot of their time doing, which was D&D. Well, when they weren't scrounging together change for chain-smoking cigarettes in one of their parents' homes when they weren't there. Man, writing about this stuff has me pining for the past. If you want an idea of what kind of group they were, the primary motto of the Overcoats was, "Today we drink tea, tomorrow we rule the world." A bunch of optimistic intellectuals they considered themselves, I suppose. But I mean, a lot of them went on to write one of the most intellectual video games of all time, so I suppose there isn't really much room to criticize. Bit off the mark of the whole ruling the world part, though. Anyway, where Disco really started was with their D&D campaign. Kind of. Robert Kurvitz, who went on to be the creator of Disco Elysium, if you want to assign terms like that, ran their D&D games in a somewhat typical fantasy setting by the name of Evermere, with other players who went on to write Disco Elysium like Argo Tulik and Martin Luiga acting as players. Try to remember those names, they'll pop up a good bit later. They didn't spend a whole lot of time playing as far as I've heard, and most of their time relating to the game was just talking about playing, which sounds pretty familiar to most people who have played D&D, and writing hundreds upon hundreds of homebrew spells for their game world. It hit scope creep by a wide margin, with some sources that I've seen saying that not a single session of Evermere was ever played, shifting further and further from its D&D roots and becoming its own TTRPG that didn't quite resemble the original framework it started out on. I'm fairly certain this is what Fortress Accident, the failed radio role-playing game you find in the doomed commercial district in Disco Elysium, is based on, or at least parts of it. Other parts of Fortress Accident seem to be based on some of the early development of Disco Elysium itself, but we'll get into that. Back on track, man, I get distracted easily. So, Evermere slowly ended up shifting over time to the world of Revachol, fantasy being swapped out for a more modern-day approach, magic being replaced with extra physics. Evermere being stripped of parts and changed to match up more with the world of Elysium that we know today, just in the TTRPG format. Between 2003 and 2007, there was 3 tabletop campaigns that were played in the world of Revachol, Kurvitz still remaining as the Dungeon Master. There's not a lot of details known about them, one of them having children trapped in some dark catacombs along with a large terror bird that probably would have killed them, and the last campaign being centered around the RCM, the Disco Elysium police force that Kim Kitsuragi, Harry Dubois, and John Vicmaire belong to, with Torsen and McLean being the focal characters, both of whom appear in Disco Elysium as side characters that Harry can interact with over the radio when calling into his police station. Also being able to hear more about them by using the Spirit Decor skills, which connects you closer to your police worker roots. Argo Tulik and Martin Luiga played Torsen and McLean respectively, and the campaign remained unfinished. I don't know the details on why it was never finished, but the most likely option is it just suffered the same fates that most D&D campaigns do. Not to make assumptions or anything, but judging by the amount of talking about D&D that occurred amongst the Overcoats versus the amount of playing, it very much seems like the kind of campaign to just fizzle out. Alright, well now I'm going to go on a little personal tangent because this is my YouTube channel and I get to talk about what I want to, but skip ahead if you just want to hear more about Disco history. I find the existence and unfinished, unpreserved states of these campaigns to be quite interesting. D&D and other TTRPGs are a bit of a strange thing conceptually to someone who has played and especially DM'd them. They are inherently creative works, pieces of writing that form a world, characters, settings, and conflict. Every piece of what makes an interesting story is present, and an interesting story does end up happening for the campaigns that play out, but they don't really exist. Not in the same way that a lot of other creative work does, at least. There's no record for the majority of campaigns like this. All we have are some relayed words and the memories of people who played these games over 20 years ago. We won't ever experience the highs of the various triumphs and the lows of the deaths and tribulations of these characters. It's smoke in the wind, ideas floating around in notoriously fallible brains. I mean, I'm certain Kurvitz has detailed notes and a lot of the world of Elysium written in stone, but who knows if we'll ever get to see or experience that. And this doesn't just apply to the Overcoats campaigns, this is true for so many stories. I mean, in my personal case, I've been a part of a D&D campaign that fizzled out. A massive schism between friends occurred right before what would have been the very last session of the campaign. A schism which is really funny now in retrospect because I'm dating the person who I had the big falling out over, and their previous partner was the DM who is now not a very big fan of me. And no, the schism wasn't over us ending up together, that happened months later. The whole thing was stupid. But anyway, that left an unfinished narrative conclusion to the stories of the characters that we all made and grew to love. Not the world, really. The campaign sucked, if I'm being honest. It was stupidly combat heavy, and none of the NPCs or events were very interesting. But still, all the players loved their own characters. I loved my ridiculously aggressive frog barbarian character, Conware, and there was the Tabaxi bard player, Shay, who ended up having a really interesting rivalry with my character. The most interesting part of the campaign, to be honest. The DM hated it, though, and tried to, shut it down at every opportunity to focus on their prophecy story, which is... I'm just gonna ramble a little bit. Prophecy stories are dumb, always lazy and just tired trope unless you have a good twist with it, which they didn't. There was also the homebrew insect-like character Clyde, who had a petty god trapped in their head, half harpy Fenkum with daddy issues. It was fun, but now nothing remains of it. I can't imagine the amount of brilliant pieces of art, probably much better than that campaign, that are just missed in people's minds by now. Sure, some are recorded, with campaigns like Critical Role being broadcast to the masses, but still, it's bittersweet to think of all the ones that only exist as memories. Even the campaign I'm running right now, with all my copious notes and world building, is doomed to one day be a thought in someone else's head, and maybe some notes on a TXT document hidden away in some old hard drive. Keep all of this in mind for later, because I feel like a lot of this is reflective on the state of Disco Elysium as a whole, and what could have been with some of the canned projects relating to the world of Disco that I'm not really allowed to talk very much about, but I'll try my best to explain in the loosest of terms. Also, to anyone who's playing my campaign right now, if you send me a DM of the timestamp of where the video is at this moment, you will get 2 points of advantage to use whenever you want. Thank you for watching the video. They won't, though. So, moving on from the early days of disco, we get to the formation of the Zaum Cultural Association by Robert Kurvitz, Martin Luiga, Alexander Rostov, Joanna Ellman, and Juri Sachs from around 2009. According to Martin Luiga, Zaum started off not as a video game studio, but as some sort of conceptual cultural movement. They wanted Zaum to be a beacon of the arts as a whole, video games not even being in the eye of Zaum at the start. The Z symbolized the movement of the eye as someone is reading, tracing left to right, back down to left, and then to right again. The A symbolized love or anarchy, with love beginning with an A in the language Estonian, and the obvious symbolism of the A of anarchy. U is supposed to symbolize you as an individual, or you as in the world, and M is the hum of the blood in your body. The slash is called a redoubling of the second movement, from love to life. I'm paraphrasing all this from one of Martin Luiga's blog posts. All my sources will be linked down below for those who want to take a look. So that's what Zaum started off as, a kind of idealistic artistic collective. I don't know the timeline or details for everyone who did end up working on Disco joining, but they all eventually ended up being on Zaum one way or another, either being hired to work on the video game or being there before it truly started. Zaum was really loose during this time anyways, from what I could tell, so it's hard to clarify any specifics. The next major event to shape the history of Elysium was the writing of the book Sacred and Terrible Air, the first produced product that took place in the universe of Disco Elysium. A book written only in Estonian. It was written entirely by Robert Kurvitz, published and distributed with the help of his friend and other Estonian writer, Kaur Kender, and allegedly edited by Martin Luiga. Okay, we're beginning to get swamped with names here, so let's just go ahead and go over these people to attach some names to some faces and keep things organized for the viewers at home. I'll do this when I think it's important for various other people later in the story. So, Robert Kurvitz. He was the original game master for the Overcoats, as I stated earlier. Frontman for the band This is a hard word to pronounce, hold up. Ultramelanhool, there we go, which released 2 albums in the early 2000s before its dissolution. If you really want to be reductive and look for a singular creator of Disco Elysium, you would have to point to him. He started the world with the TTRPG campaigns, wrote the book centered in Disco's universe, Sacred and Terrible Air, and was the lead writer of Disco Elysium itself. He started the world building of Elysium and is arguably the greatest contributor to it as well. If you want a glimpse into where he is currently, he is no longer at Zaum after being fired by the majority shareholders of the company, and has started another company called Red Info. There isn't a lot of detail about what he's up to at this moment, but he seems to be still engaged in a years-long legal battle to get the rights to Disco Elysium back, which Zaum still has. We'll get into all of that later, though. Kurvitz is widely considered by all of those around him to be a writing genius, a visionary who has the best idea for what the future of Elysium holds, and is a necessary piece of the puzzle if another Elysium game is to be made. There's also some accusations floating around that he's hard to work with, giving extraordinarily hard criticism and not being the best at management. I'll get into that accusations later, but once again, I'm just using the word accusations here. As a quick lowdown of the guy, he's basically the founder of Disco Elysium. So, Kaur Kender is up next. He was a friend of Kurvitz. I don't think he was a member of the Overcoats himself, but he was brought into Zaum around the time of the release of Sacred and Terrible Air. He's another author, infamous in Estonia for writing the extraordinarily controversial book Untitled 12. I'm not going to go into detail about the contents of the book, but it resulted in a court case against Kender that he was acquitted for. The long and short is that people thought the book was far too offensive and he was charged with writing child, the word I'm not going to say, but was later acquitted on the basis of being artistic in nature, not sexual. I don't really have much room to comment on it. I haven't read it myself, and there's been some accusations thrown around recently by Kender that he didn't even write Untitled 12 himself, that it was Robert Kurvitz who did, and he used Kender as sort of a pen name. I would take that accusation with a grain of salt, though. Maybe it could be true, but I'm not inclined to believe it. Regardless, Kender functioned as a financial supporter for the starting stages of Disco's development, and would be a high-ranking member of Zaum for a long time, even past the firings of Kurvitz and the others. He would also go on to be director at a studio, Dark Math Games, which is currently working on a spiritual successor to Disco Elysium called XXX Night Shift. I'll talk more about that later. Kaur Kender seems to be a bit of a wild card throughout this whole thing. He often ends up on various different sides of conflict, but seems to be mostly doing his own thing right now. TLDR, money guy, but he's actually also creative, so that's a bit better than a lot of the people who are going to show up later. And now for Martin Luiga. Luiga was a member of the Overcoats in the TTRPG days of Elysium from early on, and ended up being a writer at Zaum and contributed to Disco Elysium, writing characters such as Plaisance, Estelle, Manana, Lillian the Netpicker, and the racist lorry driver. He ended up writing a blog post that exposed the public to the fact that Kurvitz and a few others had been fired from Zaum from an inpatient facility after he had left himself, and then went on to work at Red Info for a bit, according to some rumors, but is now currently working as a contractor at the company Longdew, which are working on a Disco Elysium spiritual successor called Hopetown. I have some opinions about Longdew and Hopetown that I'll get into later, but later's for later. Martin Luiga is once again another wild card. Hi dog. Hi dog. There's a dog here now. Hi dog. Okay, he's not leaving me alone. Dog break. Can't see the dog. Go away. Go away. Spend 5 minutes on his Twitter page and you'll get an idea for what I mean. I hope he's doing well. He seems to have gone through some bad times recently, and regardless of anything related to this whole debacle, I hope everyone can pick themselves up and feel better as people. Short of Luiga is that he was a writer on Disco, and as far as I can tell, he's now the only Disco writer who is working on Hopetown. So, Kurvitz ends up writing and having Sacred and Terrible Air punished in 2013 with the help of Kaderblast. The book doesn't do too well. It's a critical success. Those who end up reading it praise it heavily, but it only ends up selling roughly 1,000 copies out of the approximately 4,000 printed. If you don't know writing, that's not a good amount. The commercial failure hits Kurvitz and to an extent, Zaum hard. Kurvitz allegedly struggling with alcoholism for a while after the failure of Sacred and Terrible Air, being helped out of that by Kender, who used to struggle with alcoholism himself. A year passes, and Kender approaches Kurvitz one day to suggest making a video game, specifically one set in the world of Elysium. Kurvitz took a day to think it over, and responded to Kender with an email pitching what the game could be. To Cower Kender. Initial working title, Torsen and McLean. Being a video game for PC, Mac, and tablet computers. AD&D meets 70s cop show, in an original fantastic realist setting with swords, guns, and motor cars. Realized in an isometric CRPG, a modern advancement on the legendary Planetscape Torment and Baldur's Gate. Massive, reactive story, exploring a vast, poverty-stricken ghetto, deep strategic combat. Be a cop. You're a cop, Harry. Choose what kind of cop you are. Good cop, bad cop, lady cop, man cop, a socialist revolutionary disguised as a cop, a criminal mastermind disguised as a cop. You can even be a real lazy cop who doesn't want to be a cop. Solve cases however you see fit. Uncover an overarching mystery. Shoot gangbangers in the face. How many people have you killed, John? 54. Yes, but they were all bad. Fail at human relationships. Featuring serious moral themes, socioeconomic depth, the greatest fantasy setting ever conceived, beautiful hand-drawn graphics, and never-before-seen art direction, blood-pumping, toe-curling, skull-crushing combat, level up your ability to dream, see in the dark, Torsen and McLean, the role-playing game. Obviously, there's some differences between that proposal and what the actual Disco Elysium will become, but that's the first recorded bit of information on what would become Disco Elysium. As Alexander Rostov, art director of Disco, said, "My friend, we failed at so many things. Let us also fail at making a video game." And so development begins on Disco Elysium, the game's name changing to No Truce with the Furies from Torsen and McLean while in development. Funding is hard to come by at first, and the original development cycle is meager, with Kaderblast having to sell his Ferrari to help fund development, which by the way was originally owned by Dolph Lundgren. Not really interesting, just thought that was a neat fact. The earlier development cycle was loose and experimental, mostly friends and artists meeting up in person at an ex-gallery in Tallinn, Estonia. Different artistic fields constantly collaborating, with art director Alexander Rostov painting in the studio while Kurvitz would sit behind him writing world building. Okay, so here's another little bio introduction. Alexander Rostov, the lead art director for Disco Elysium. He had the initial idea for the clothing brand that Zaum runs at this point, Atelier. He was and remains a close friend of Robert Kurvitz, being fired from the studio with him and helping him to found Red Info later on. Him and Kurvitz are currently a collaborative unit in the whole legal battle situation. Rostov has been described as a very, very friendly person by all who have heard speak about him, even those who have had fallings out with him only saying good things about him as a person. The short version, he was the lead art director for Disco Elysium, and he's been with Kurvitz throughout essentially the whole situation. So the development for Disco Elysium continued, essentially running on financial fumes. I don't know exactly who all was working at the team at this point, but as far as I can tell, the vast majority, if not all of the main Zaum team, excluding consultants and groups brought in like the Knights of Unity, were working on Disco at this point, including figures like Helen Hinpier, Martin Luiga, and Argo Tulik as writers. In 2016, Zaum got its first round of venture capitalism funding, which gave them the funds to bring in the band Sea Power, previously known as British Sea Power. As far as I can tell, they changed their name over British politics at the time, such as Brexit, to make the soundtrack for Disco Elysium. From what I could tell, Margus Linnamäe, an Estonian venture capitalist who was involved in the Disco Elysium stock debacle, selling his stock to Ilmar Compass, who is currently the CEO at Zaum, was the one responsible for the majority of funding of Disco during its development. At some point, Kaur Kender's share of the company was sold to Ilmar Compass, who brought in his business partner and brother-in-law, Thomas Havel, as an executive producer. He's a very important name that will show up later, but I'm not going to go into a ton of detail right now. But if you need a very small picture of who he is for the moment, him and Ilmar Compass are currently the executive figures at the top of Zaum. I don't know exactly when Havel joined, but I've heard he was instrumental in the business side of Disco being made, so just know that he showed up at some point during development, and that both Linnamäe and Compass both had stock in the company by 2016, with Linnamäe having around 85% and Compass having roughly 15%. Now, as I was saying, Disco has now gotten official funding. Most of the development was being done in that ex-gallery in Tallinn that I had mentioned earlier, but an office was opened in the UK after Zaum had a meeting with Sea Power in Birmingham, falling in love with the area and realizing it was a much easier place to do game development than Estonia. Most of Zaum ends up moving to the studio in the UK. Development continues, and in 2018, the title No Truce with the Furies is changed to Disco Elysium, Kurvitz saying that the original title was too wordy and it was always temporary anyways. Personally, I agree with the change. I don't think I would have bought a game called No Truce with the Furies, but Disco Elysium just rolls off the tongue super easily. Anyway, ZA makes that announcement, and then we flash forward to 2019, and Disco Elysium is released to brilliant success, racking up a 90+ Metacritic score, winning 4 awards at the 2019 Game Awards, and winning Ultimate Game of the Year at the Golden Joystick Awards. Just to clarify, this is not the exact version of Disco we have today. The final cut, which added full voice acting for each of the skills' voices, done by the amazing narrator Lenville Brown, who also voiced Sisyphus in Ultrakill, man, I fucking love Ultrakill, and the political quest lines were added later. There were plenty more additions, with some changes made to some of the less polished voice acting, more art and animations, along with fast travel and graphical/performance enhancements. The final cut was announced at the 2020 Game Awards and was promptly released in March of 2021. I'll go into more detail about some of the development strife that it went through. It's important to some of the accusations made about a toxic workplace environment to Kurvitz and Rostov, but that's what you need to know for right now. That about wraps up the majority development of Disco Elysium, at least by the full crew of ZA before the whole stock situation that I'll talk about in a second occurred, and the firings of Rostov, Kurvitz, Mart Luiga, and Helen Hindbeer. Oh, and also as an added point that I didn't know quite where to fit in the video, the television production company DJ2 Entertainment ended up getting the rights to a potential Disco Elysium TV show, with Amazon having distribution rights to the entire studio of DJ2. Nothing ended up happening of it, and I don't think there were ever any official plans made about a Disco TV show, but I just wanted to let people know that it is legally possible, but it's probably never gonna happen. Is it time for a quick break? Yeah, I think it's time for an analysis break. I don't like to use the term lightning in a bottle very often, and it inherently implies that something was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing, but unfortunately, I think Disco Elysium was that lightning in a bottle. It could probably be redone, but the circumstances would have to be extraordinarily specific and somehow get all of the people who worked on it before working together again. As you'll see soon, that isn't a very likely circumstance. The biggest contributor to the success of Disco, if you're asking me specifically, is that crossover between different fields of artistry at every stage of development, and the largely collaborative nature of the work done on Disco. You can make a video game without those things. I mean, it's a highly used practice for AAA companies to cordon off each department to do their own work, collaboration limited to design docs sent between departments and overseen by some form of project manager. Disco Elysium had writers directly talking to artists while they created portraits of characters, though. Hours-long editing sessions where everyone would get in the same room and talk over the writing that had just been done. It wasn't bogged down by bureaucratic decisions and executives. Now, I'm not saying those things aren't important. I mean, there were business-savvy people who were instrumental to the success of Disco Elysium. It's a sad truth, but art can't survive on passion alone. Someone has to understand money, and the people who did for Disco were the Kaur Kenders and Tonis Havels of the world. I don't know the specifics of what Tonis Havel did for Disco, but I've heard from people who are not fond of him as a person that despite what he did later, Disco probably wouldn't have been able to happen without him. Money men are kind of important to make a company run. Regardless, after all of this, the future looked up for ZA, so what the hell happened between now and then? And now Disco Elysium is officially finished. Before the Final Cut began development, there was a hangover period where there wasn't a ton of work being done at the studio. The Final Cut did begin development shortly, but according to several sources, Kurvitz and Rostov were kind of checked out for most of the development. I don't know the full validity of that statement, but it makes sense seeing as Kurvitz was going around beginning to organize things relating to the sequel, taking in different writers and planning some kind of excursion to kick off work for the Disco Elysium sequel. Justin Keenan, who is currently a lead writer at ZA, along with Helen Hindbeer, who exited the studio with Kurvitz and Rostov, both did a large part of the management work when it came to the Final Cut, responsibilities that normally would have been Kurvitz and Rostov's. Kurvitz and Rostov actually ended up having a shift in their positions and responsibilities, the previously mentioned Justin Keenan and Kaspar Tamsulu taking over an administrative counterpart position to Kurvitz and Rostov respectively. Essentially, they would oversee the more boring administrative work that Kurvitz and Rostov used to do so it could free them up to be more creatively available. Now, there's some questioning on whether or not this decision was really made in their best interests, with some believing the higher-ups in the studio, particularly the business side, made this decision to put Kurvitz and Rostov on a bit of a tighter leash. Their creatives, and they, Kurvitz specifically, have been known to make sporadic and wild decisions mostly based on creative whims, which I may add are the same creative whims that did produce Disco Elysium, but actions like that aren't really the kind of things that executive types like to see. I'll get into how this administrative shifting of roles backfired on Rostov and Kurvitz in a second. First, let me go ahead and introduce the new people I've mentioned. Okay, so Helen Hindbeer. She was a writer on Disco Elysium, working mostly on things such as the doomed commercial district, the church area, and the working class woman's quest. She was an early member of the Zaum Cultural Association and was in a romantic relationship with Robert Kurvitz. I don't know the details of that now, nor do I care to learn because that's their personal lives, but it feels important to mention because it did play into some events at the studio. She was fired along Kurvitz and Rostov and was accused of not fulfilling all of her duties during the development of the Final Cut. Now, I'm kind of skeptical of this. From what I can tell, she was put into a difficult position with mismanaged direction from up top, and suffered abuse and discrimination from executives such as Thomas Havel. I don't have any specific information on where she is right now or what she's working on, but she seems to be intentionally avoiding attention, so I recommend against anyone pushing for that information out of the sake of common decency and respect. According to an interview from May 2024, she says she feels comfortable speaking for Rostov and Kurvitz when it comes to political alignment in the game, so perhaps they're on good terms. Maybe not, that's just conjecture on my part though. Alright, next person, Justin Keenan. He was the principal editor on Disco Elysium and a writer on the Final Cut. According to himself, he ended up picking up a lot of the responsibilities on the Final Cut that Helen Hinpier did not herself do. He is now a lead writer at Zaum, working on their new project, C4. He ended up taking an administrative position parallel to Robert Kurvitz shortly before Kurvitz was fired, and ended up getting within the inner circle at the top of Zaum, rising in position fairly easily. Kasper Tamsulu was an artist on Disco Elysium, and once again, I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing these names. I am not close to Estonian, and regardless of my opinion on some of these people, I would like to do them justice, so any mispronunciation is just a mistake on my part. But Kasper Tamsulu was an artist on Disco Elysium, providing character portraits for characters such as Renee. He's currently a lead artist at Zaum and is working on their primary project right now alongside Keenan, Project C4. He took an administrative position in parallel to Rostov, which resulted in a similar situation of him ending up in a tight circle with the administratives at Zaum, such as Thomas Havel, and getting a fairly high position within the company. I don't have any direct confirmation that he's still at the company at the moment of writing this, things change quickly, but according to my most recent information, he is still there as a lead artist. Okay, so back to the narrative. So, Kurvitz and Rostov, along with a few others, end up taking their vacation days that are allotted to them, all of the ones available within a year, over a single continuous period, which makes approximately 2 months. During this time, we get into the Disco Elysium stock fiasco of 2021. Now I'm going to try to explain this in idiot terms, because I am an idiot and bad at money and numbers. But if you want a more detailed version that's probably not as wrong as mine, go watch the People Make Games documentary on Disco Elysium. It does a much better job of explaining the specifics on how Kurvitz and others were ousted from Zaum, and how ownership ended up switching hands. Plus, I did take the majority of my research from that video, so if you want to go see a more accurate, further up the chain source, go look at them instead. It's linked in the description below. Okay, so remember Margus Liname? No, that's fine. He's basically the primary funding force behind the development of Disco Elysium, alongside one other name, Ilmar Compass. Compass had roughly 15% of the stock at Zaum, buying some from Kaderblast in 2016, and Liname had the remaining 85%. Following the success of Disco Elysium, a deal was made in 2020 to spread the stock amongst the company. Kurvitz, Rostov, and Kender getting approximately 10% each, Compass having 25%, and Liname having 47%. These are rounded numbers. There was like a 0.2% that was just within the studio itself, but that doesn't matter much for the overall situation that I'm going into right now. The important part is that Liname had less than 50% of the stock, so he couldn't single-handedly make decisions about the company if the other stockholders banded together to make a decision themselves. But in 2021, while Kurvitz and Rostov were on that vacation I mentioned earlier, Liname decided to sell his stock of the company, which went to Ilmar Compass, getting him to roughly 70% holding in the company, pushing him over that 50% required threshold, which gave him full control over the decisions in the company, control he used to make a series of decisions that I'm going to get into in a second. The sketchy part, though, is how that transaction occurred. For a simplified version of it, Compass was expected to pay 45 million euros for the stock to Liname, 1.5 million up front and the rest later. For the initial payment, he used 300,000 of his own funds and took a loan of 1.2 million from the company Disco Elysium UK Limited, a company made to house the IP of Disco Elysium. Kender was aware of this as director of that company and actually signed off on the loan. Later, to pay the remainder of the 4.5 million, he purchased a game IP from Zaum titled Pioneer 1 for €1, aka Project P1, which will be a very important project later in Zaum's history. Spoiler alert, it ended up getting cancelled. He purchased essentially a proposal for the game, a few documents and sketches which I assume was created by Kender. I don't know for certain, but Kender was the one who created Project P1 and did the majority of the work on it when he was within Zaum. Anyways, he took that IP and sold it back to the company for 4.8 million euros. No biggie, just generate 4,799,999 euros out of nowhere, turn on the money machine and just let the blood flow. Compass used 3 million of it to pay off the rest of the money he owed Liname, 1.5 million to pay back the loan and cover his personal funds, and I suppose another 300,000 just went straight into his pockets. Yeah, that's okay, people could do that. According to Kurvitz and Rostov, they had no idea that any of this occurred. Okay, I need a second to collect myself. This whole thing is fucking insane to me, and I need to introduce Compass, his brother-in-law, Thomas Havel, since he's about to become a lot more important, and we could take a second to analyze what the hell just went down with that stock thing. Okay, so Ilmar Compass, current CEO of Zaum, and the guy who allegedly stole the Zaum IP. He wasn't really involved in any of the actual production or work related to Disco Elysium from what I've heard, and he holds a similar position currently at Zaum. He's a walking bag of money. also being described as somewhat shrouding himself in a dad jokes, friendly guy you'd like to share a beer with persona, according to Argo Tulik in the Human Can Opener podcast. Great source. Most of the info I'll be showing later about what actually happened within Zaum is from there. If you want to look at actual more hands-on executive in the company, you'll have to take a look at its brother-in-law and business partner, Tonis Havel. Tonis Havel, executive producer of Disco Elysium, some kind of executive position in Zaum right now, I don't know the specifics, and convicted financial criminal. Yes, you heard me correctly, he is a convicted financial criminal. In something called the Baku Affair, a lawsuit was made against him and several of his associates in 2014 for investment fraud, pocketing the funds of some investment opportunity they proposed to others. He took the majority of the fall for it, avoiding jail time but being required to pay back the stolen money. Not sure if he has yet. The PMG documentary goes into a bit more detail about how he's managed to avoid paying all of that. He's also accused of several accounts of workplace harassment and discrimination, which I will get into later on in the video. Yes, I know there's a lot of that, but I'm trying to keep things in order. It is a lot. He is one of the main reasons why Helen Hinpier struggled to complete her duties during the development of the final cut. And now let's talk about that whole stock debacle, huh? Well, Kaderblast ended up taking Ilmar Compass to court over the whole thing in 2022 after he was fired from Zaum, oops, spoilers, and dropped the case after the $4.8 million was paid back to the company. Now, the question on whether or not the entire thing is legal isn't my area of expertise. From what I can tell, Ilmar Compass generated 4.8 million euros of value from absolutely nothing, used that money to leverage himself into ownership of the company, and then waited a year before paying it back. A year where he most likely massively profited from that position as CEO of the company, probably generating a good portion of the money that he paid back later into the company in that CEO position. I mean, what does paying back Zaum even mean? Not taking a paycheck for a while? He's still CEO of the company. There's an inherent value in the power that gives you anyways. I mean, it ended up getting him Disco Elysium and basically made sure we're not getting a sequel. I don't know, if it's legal, then it definitely shouldn't be. There's no work in this, no actual value created from that little loophole, no effort put into any significant way that means he should be owed any part of Disco Elysium. He just found a weird little way to end up with the majority stock in a company. Here's hoping that Kurvitz and Rostov beat him in court, but from what I can tell, it's gonna be a while before we see what becomes of all of that. So, Kurvitz was looking to undo the administrative situation that him and Rostov were put into, with Justin Keenan and Kaspar Tamsulu having an administrative counterpart position to the two. Kurvitz was worried that Keenan had too much power over him in that position, which was most likely true. This is before the stock exchange thing as far as I can tell. It just shows a through line for them being shoved out of the company even before the whole stock thing went down. So, Kurvitz and Rostov returned from their 2-month vacation, the entire stock debacle having exchanged under their noses without them ever signing anything or being aware of it, at least according to their own testimonies. Helen Hinpier is the one who becomes aware of the stock exchange at first, letting Kurvitz and Rostov know about it. Tensions begin to grow within the company between the executives and Kurvitz and Rostov, the two of them being cut out from daily operations within the company and losing access to financial documents. Kurvitz ends up having a meeting where he openly discusses his plans for what to do moving forwards. The details of the meeting aren't known, but Argo Tulik was there, as he's the one who mentions it in the Human Can Opener podcast, and Justin Keenan is also there. And of course, Keenan then goes and reports that to management. Keenan and Kaspar Tamsulu actually end up giving testimonies to management as a part of the process to fire Kurvitz and Rostov, with it initially being pitched to the company that Kurvitz and Rostov haven't been permanently fired. They still had stock in the company after all, and will be brought back as contractors. This obviously never ended up happening, and I sincerely doubt there was any intention of that to happen in the first place. That's just speculation on my part though. Helen Hinpier was also fired a week after Kurvitz was, with vague reasoning for her firing being given to the company. In a newsletter presented by Rostov, he also mentions that him and Kurvitz asked for financial documents and then are fired weeks later, so that probably contributed to their termination. Sorry for the lack of clarity on all the exact details and timeline of these things. There's a lot of sources, and they aren't exactly all aligned on very specific with dates. Rostov was put on a 2-week probation before his firing, most likely because he was essentially universally liked within the company according to Argo Tulik, which resulted in him being fired at the end of that 2-week period. And so we enter the post-Kurvitz era of Zaum. This period of time is marked by severe mismanagement of the projects within the company, executive favoritism, and a cocktail of several other missteps that resulted in just about every major project the company was working on being canned. There's a bit of a problem with a lot of the stuff in this era of Zaum, and it's the fact that almost all of it comes exclusively from one source, the Zaum Inside Story, episodes of the Human Can Opener podcast, which is an in-depth, nearly 16-hour interview with Disco Elysium writer Argo Tulik and previous Zaum employee Dora Klinzik, where they detail their experience in the company from the completion of Disco Elysium up to their exit from the company. I highly recommend giving it a listen. It is a long one, but they go into significantly more detail than I can in this video. It's on the 41st Precinct YouTube channel, along with being present on most other podcast listening services. I'm really grateful for its existence, if I'm being honest. Without it, most of this video wouldn't be possible. The unfortunate thing I mentioned about it, though, is despite the supreme quality of it as a direct source, it is the only direct source. Personally, I trust the words of Tulik and Klinzik, but keep in mind that this is the only direct source that I have as I go over this. Honestly, it says something about the two of them and many things about the other people involved that they're the only ones who are willing to step forward and give their testimony. Speaking of the two of them, let's give them the introductions that have been long overdue. Argo Tulik was a member of the Overcoats and a primary player in the original TTRPG games that occurred before Disco Elysium, notably playing the character of Torsen in the Torsen McLean stint of the TTRPG. He was an original member of the Zaum Cultural Association and went on to be a writer on Disco Elysium, writing characters such as Kuno, the Hardy Boys, Everett Clare, and Measurehead. He did not initially leave the studio when Kurvitz, Hinpier, and Rostov did, and stayed quite a bit longer before being fired. He then went on to start the disco spiritual successor company Summer Eternal with Dora Klinzik, which has had a few hiccups and run-ins with some other people that I'll get into later. Personally, I think I'm gonna have to show my bias here as a journalist, as I have a bit of a soft spot for Tulik and Klinzik. They're some of the most revolutionary and loud voices I've seen throughout this whole thing, and seem to have some of the best intentions throughout all of this, which is to make some fucking banger art. Dora Klinzik was brought into Zaum after the exit of Kurvitz & Co. in 2022, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have her own set of creative chops. She worked on her own indie game for a long while before entering Zaum, which was a major part of how she was hired at the company, directly interviewing under Argo Tulik and impressing him quite extensively. She was also a space researcher for a time before Zaum, a physicist with a focus on radio astronomy. She worked with Tulik and Zaum until her eventual exit from the company with him, working on projects such as C4 and X7, which I'll touch on later in the video. Klinzik helped to found Summer Eternal with Tulik and is still currently there working on an unnamed project. So, for a period of time after the exits of Kurvitz, Rostov, and Hinpier, the company was attempting to keep working on projects that they were before, specifically Project Y12. Not much is known about Y12, but it is the codename for the Disco Elysium sequel that was proposed by Kurvitz before he left. There's not many details to be extrapolated from it. It seems like it would have had a more extensive partner system with various more potential partners to pick from. It would have also featured Jean McMahon more extensively than in Disco, probably having him be Harry's primary partner, and it was possibly going to revolve around the revolution that the RCM was hinted at doing during the end of Disco Elysium behind a spirit to course check. Regardless, it was cancelled by Kaderblast shortly after the exit of Kurvitz. Tulik mentions that it seemed like a good decision on his part, as that the project was highly unlikely to be finished without Kurvitz and had been struggling to find clarity without him and Rostov. Keenan and Tamsulu were the leads of the project during that period, and it really just wasn't working out. Now, the cancellation wasn't handled the best from what I can tell. There was an all-hands Zoom meeting in the company, where the leads just began pitching the next project that would go on to become Project C4. It took halfway through the meeting for someone to ask if they were still doing Y12, to which they were just told, yeah, no, that's not happening anymore, and then they were working on Project C4. C4 is an interesting project because it is simultaneously the worst received project in the company, having a whole host of issues when it was presented, and somehow the only one that is still in development at Zaum. C4 was created by Justin Keenan, Kaur Kender, Kender's girlfriend, and Kasper Tamsulu during a trip to New York. It was brainstormed over 1 or 2 weeks in a hotel according to Argo Tulik, and then was presented to the team on a Zoom call I just mentioned before. Now, I don't know what state it is right now, but when it was pitched, Dora Klinzik described it as misogynistic, and Argo Tulik called it one of the worst things I've seen in my entire life, and offensive for a middle school project. The biggest problem that was described, I'm not even certain if it is the biggest problem in the project. There was vague mentions of concepts that would be literally impossible to pull off in a video game, but the worst one that was described was the almost stereotypical and shallow nature of several of the characters. For example, random background characters would get pages and pages of backstory despite almost never appearing, and the female protagonist, who from what I've seen seems to be some sort of espionage agent called an operant, can be described by the sentence, wants love and to be loved. Blech. It seems to, or seemed to, I don't know how much it's developed by now, to have a bit of a male gaze syndrome to the female characters, Mary Sue types. And to be honest, even regardless of any commentary on women in video games, at the very least, characters should be believable. I'm not in much of a space to speak on this as a man, but I think at the very least, if you want to write believable characters, you should have the writers have some experience or idea of what it's like to be in the shoes of those characters, if it's possible. I get that sometimes you have a small team, and there are several examples of well-written female characters by men that I can think of, so it is certainly not impossible. From what I can tell, though, the leads of C4 cannot pull that off. I'll get into more detail about it when I go over XXX Night Shift, oh lord, XXX Night Shift, and some of the other red flags I've seen from Kaur Kender and the writing of that game. Another issue that plagued the project, from what I could tell, is the cannibalization of Project Y12, aka the Disco sequel. It takes place in a completely different world, but parts were taken from the story of Y12 and crammed into C4 since they're both disco-inspired CRPGs. But at least in my opinion, that seems disrespectful to the writing that Kurvitz did on Y12, and unfitting to take writing you didn't create and repurpose it for your own purposes. Keenan, Tamsalu, and Kender were leading the project at first, but Kender ended up being fired from the studio, and Slim Cosmo Cineme is currently a writer on the game. There's a trailer out now for the game, and an interview with Cineme where he discusses some of the details of the project. Seems to be an espionage-focused game with some theming related to identity from the perspective on who you present yourself as and what you do. There's a system that Cosmos describes called conditioning, where you essentially attach thought cabinet ideas to yourself and either punish or reward those thoughts. He used an example of a non-smoker thought, where if you have that thought and abstain from smoking, you get a bonus, but if you have that thought and smoke, it is going against your identity and you lose the bonus and get a penalty. I don't know how it would actually act, and it's a bit of a concerning idea. He doesn't mention anything else about what rewarding would look like, and if it's mostly a punishment-based system, that's a system that inherently pushes players away from interacting with the world, lest they face a penalty. I'm seeing more negative reinforcement being used while watching the interview, with you gaining disadvantage to check if you push your character too hard. The mechanic makes sense from a storytelling perspective, but I can imagine how it would be frustrating from a gameplay one. It's still in development right now, and besides my concerns with the conditioning system, most of the complaints are from 2022, so perhaps things have gotten better. But a lot of the roots are rotten, and it's been marred by a troubled development, so I'm not terribly confident in it right now. Not to mention the line, half as much, twice as good, being used by Cinema in the interview, which is not the Zaum I've been seeing so far. The art looks good at least, but I know that I'm not giving this Zaum any of my money, that's for damn sure. Obviously, when this project was announced, various people had issues with it, and there was a bit of a morale crisis within the company seeing the sequel be canned. People had worries about job security, along with concerns about how this new project is being handled and quality concerns with the pitch. Tulek and Klinzik took it upon themselves as some of the more senior writers in the company to take some of these complaints that they had and others had to management, which, as they described, put them on a bit of a shit list within the company. Tom Sulu and Keenan seemed to be in a bit of a tough spot as leads on this new project. It was a brand new large project to the company, they were new to the positions, and they were being handled by Kender and Thomas Havel, as Tulek put it. Seems difficult to be a truly leading lead at Zaum. There's always someone standing over your shoulder exerting their own will from some more managerial position. Disagreements brewed between the C4 leads and Tulek and Klinzik, culminating in a trip to New York where they are both removed from the project. Note that they weren't removed from Zaum the company, just removed from working on the current project due to being viewed as problematic within the team. The validity of those claims, I'm not so sure about it. It just seems like to me that they just wanted to do what was best for the project and the team, but the environment at Zaum didn't really facilitate creative differences between leads. The kind of rhetoric I heard being mentioned was the idea of putting your foot down as a lead on a project. But the problem with that is that sure, they may be talented and have some good ideas, a big may there, but even if someone is creatively really well put together, there needs to be some input from others on a project, especially if those others are two very accomplished and senior writers within their team. Now, there's roughly a period of a month where Tulek and Klinzik weren't working on anything in specific that they spoke on during the podcast. I think there may have been something that they were working on during that time, but they seemed to be under NDA for it. After that month, they were then put under Kaur Kender for him to find something for them to do, with Tulek and Klinzik pushing for maybe another foray into the world of Elysium. Kaur Kender proposed that they create another, smaller Disco Elysium project, since they weren't able to work on the sequel. Apparently that idea had been floating around since even before Dora Klinzik joined Zaum, and Kender had finally found an opportunity to begin exploring a smaller Elysium kind of expansion game. They were given roughly a week to create a proposal for what that project actually would be around August of 2022, and now we enter the era of Project X7. I want to give X7 the same kind of synopsis that I gave C4, I really do, but this project in particular is a bit of a dangerous thing to tread upon. I'm not sure how much I can speak on this at all. There was a leaked presentation that was posted on social media on April 1st of 2025 that showed a lot of details on what the X7 project would have been. Unfortunately, I'm not really able to talk about anything within that actual presentation. Zaum has been trying their very hardest to wipe any existence of this leak off the internet completely, and has even been copyright striking YouTube videos that discuss or use any footage from this leaked presentation. What I can tell you, I think, is that it was a smaller project focused mostly on the Disco Elysium world, not the Elysium world. It would have featured two certain annoying children from Disco Elysium as the protagonists, and did a good job of expanding upon the systems already present in Disco Elysium. You could probably find that leaked presentation I'm talking about if you look hard enough. The community has a good read on the kind of stuff that Zaum does, and did a really good job of backing it up in a bunch of places. I can't condone that, because that would look bad on me, but it's definitely possible. Argo Tulek and Dora Klinzik created the concept and were leads on the project for most of it. Of course, some weird bullshit happened, and then they weren't. C'est la Zaum. Project X7 seemed to have the most actual work done of any of the Zaum projects that I'll be discussing, except for maybe C4, but it was unfortunately cancelled shortly before Argo Tulek and Dora Klinzik were fired from the company. If you want my personal read on the project, it seems like it would have actually been a good expansion of the world of Disco Elysium. The characters that were front and center in the game were well understood by Tulek and Klinzik, Tulek having written one of the main characters himself while he was working on Disco. From how the project was discussed, everyone seemed to genuinely love working on it, and I think it would have been a worthy side project even if Robert Kurvitz wasn't a part of it. It didn't step on the toes of anything that the sequel would have been about, and seemed to actually have a good reason to exist. It wasn't just bleeding the Elysium IP dry, it had something to say about the characters we didn't receive closure on, and I'm quite disappointed it never saw the light of day. Maybe in another world. Pitch for X7 went over really well, with especially Kender being impressed by the concept, but that doesn't mean X7 was completely in the clear on the development side. This is still post-Kurvitz ZA we're talking about. One of the heavily listed issues with all the new projects Zaum was making was the lack of pre-production. The philosophy of the company seemed to be no need to prepare, just start writing. Now, that may seem like it has some benefits, but pre-production is integral to getting a strong central vision on what the project is going to be before you get straight to work on it. It doesn't matter what time you save from not doing pre-production if you just make up all that time later when you have to rewrite a million things over and over and over again, or have to spend a bunch of time working to get people on the same page about something. A big part of the creative process is making sure that creatives have a good cohesive vision on what a project is going to be, even if that vision is immediately put into what could be considered a finished project. I mean, look at the world of Elysium. There's probably stacks upon stacks of documentation about things that don't actually exist within the game itself, but are integral to make the universe feel alive. If you only write things that are directly going to be in the game, you lose a lot of good world building. I think you could probably think of some examples that suffer from that approach, that lack of depth. The project does actually manage to pick up a good amount of steam though, despite the hiccups. Turns out if you hire a bunch of new people to work on something Disco Elysium, they do a good job of making something Disco Elysium. The project is actually doing so well that there are people on the C4 team asking to transfer over to do work on X7, which continues to build tension between the X7 leads and the C4 leads, them feeling as though X7 is stealing people from the C4 team. Regardless, the project is doing quite well, and management decides that they want a trailer for X7 for the 2022 Game Awards, so the entire project is put on hold to begin work on a good-looking trailer. The thing with trailers, at least from what I know about video game development, is they can't just be made by lifting footage from the current build of the game that's being developed. Polish is one of the last things done for a video game, so if he did that, the trailer would just be a collection of temporary assets, sloppy voiceover work, and a million other things that wouldn't be acceptable for a trailer. So you have to create a separate, clean-looking version of things that's presentable for the public to see. That'll also be a good representation of what the game will end up being. This put a lot of stress on the X7 team at the time, and on top of that stress is when Kaur Kender was removed or quit from the company. I'm leaning on the fired side of things from all that I've seen, but there isn't as many details about his exit from the company as when Kurvitz, Rostov, and Hinpir were taken out. But he does end up trying to sue the company over the stock debacle thing shortly after his exit. That's how most of the actual details relating to the stock exchange were discovered, but Kender ended up dropping the case later, calling it misguided. In April of 2023, he ends up founding the company Dark Math Games with a few other individuals, but we'll touch on Dark Math later. Unfortunately, the trailer for X7 was never finished, and Kender was slowly and quietly disappeared from the company. The trailer probably wasn't going to be done in time, but the real thing that rocked the boat was a blog post released by Martin Luiga on October 1st of 2022. If you remember from earlier, Luiga was a writer on Disco Elysium and a member of the Overcoats during the old days. At some point, he had also left or was removed from the company, and at the start of October, he makes this post from the Tallinn Inpatient Treatment Center of Psychiatry. The dissolution of the Zaum Cultural Association. I, Martin Luiga, a founding member and secretary of the Zaum Cultural Association, as well as the assembler of most of the core team, am hereby dissolving the Zaum Cultural Association, not to be confused with the Zaum Company, on which the subject I would note that neither Kurvitz, Hinpir, nor Rostov are working there since the end of last year, and their leaving the company was involuntarily, which would seem like bad news for the loving fans that are waiting for the Disco sequel. The reason for dissolving the cultural organization is that it no longer represents the ethos it was founded on. People and ideas are meant to be eternal. Organizations may well be temporary. I find that the organization was successful overall, and most of the mistakes that were made were contingent, determined by the socio-cultural conditions that we were thrown into. I still encourage people to organize, and one of the qualities that the Zaum Cultural Organization sorely lacked was pretty much any formal structure. For a while it was beautiful. My sincerest thanks to all that have rooted for us. Martin Luiga, Tallinn Inpatient Treatment Center of Psychiatry Clinic, Ward IX, 10/1/2022. This is the first public mention of the fact that Kurvitz, Rostov, and Hinpir have been removed from the company, and the backlash against the studio was almost instantaneous. Luiga went on to make another blog post on October the 15th, which went into even more detail about the situation at Zaum. Now, I understand why this made fans upset. If I had been a fan of Disco at the time, I would have also been pretty fucking upset. The thing I cannot support, though, is the massive amount of hatred the members at Zaum received at the time. If this video ends up getting any kind of traction, I expect no one to send any kind of hate information towards anyone who is currently working at Zaum or did work at Zaum. There are people who are still there who still want to make good things, and that was also the mindset of the company during that time. I think it was a good thing that Luiga made the blog post at the time, but the reaction from the community calling everyone at Zaum a scab and more nasty things really harmed the morale of the company. It's especially bad because the X7 project was an attempt to really fix things, to create a good project at Zaum and win back some of the goodwill from the company. Luckily, there were some good workers on the X7 project, and they took this as an opportunity to double down during that time, do a good job, and prove themselves as people that make a good game despite the problems on the management and executive side of the company. Development continues on X7 and presumably all other projects at Zaum, but I don't have a first-hand account of any of them except for X7. And another fun little thing that is brought up is the clothing brand part of Zaum, Zaum Atelier.
starts asking the X7 team to design an iconic piece of clothing to market and sell, similar to Kim's jacket. Tulik brings up the problems with this really well, especially the fact that you can't just manufacture something iconic like that. Kim's jacket looks good, but it's iconic because it's Kim's jacket. Kim is cool, and his jacket looks good, obviously, but it wouldn't nearly be as iconic without the level of coolness from Kim. You don't design an iconic jacket the same way you don't design a viral tweet, as Tulik said. Atelier has some details about it that kind of piss me off, to be honest. I don't know how much of this is to be trusted, but according to Klinzik, management was saying that some of the people who complain the most about Zaum's situation are the same people who are buying the same insane merch that Atelier, Zaum's designer merch company, is putting out. They can tell from things like the Twitter handles matching up with names on orders and the like. So I gotta say, please, fucking please, don't get so caught up in the hype of seeing cool disco things that you spend $50 on a shitty tear bag that they're selling. The literal bag in a game that is used to carry around garbage to sell because you are that poor, being a designer item that you are buying from a pretty evil capitalistic company. Like, oh my fucking god. The cognitive dissonance it must take to be that much of a hypocrite. And it's always the people who are the loudest against capitalism. Armchair politics, I hate that kind of stuff. Making a 50-page rant on Blue Sky about how every company should unionize and the evil of purchasing from large corporations with a grande cappuccino from Starbucks in your hand, a new Mac laptop that you're making the post on, expensive plushies produced in China in your lap, and apparently a $500 Kim Kitsuragi jacket from Atelier draped over your chair. It's not that hard to spend money on evil things, guys. I don't spend any money, trust me. I mean, it helps that I'm flat broke, but even if I wasn't, I think I'd have enough courtesy to not be that kind of hypocrite. As Klinzik said, these people covet the items more than they care about their morals and integrity. For God's sake, please don't be like that. Okay, back to the good part. Alright, so Zaum is a bit of a morale shitstorm, and management decide that they need to address the details going on within the company finally. So they have these campfire meetings, as they call it, where they try to answer some things within the company. Various different things are discussed, a lot of which includes Tonus's background. Obviously, everything is basically deflected, calling Kurvitz a liar, Rostov a liar, Hinpir a liar, Luiga a liar, etc, etc, etc. The idea of making the company a co-op is floated around, where stock is dispersed through the workers, and HR worker Patrick Norberg, who is allegedly a well-read Marxist, shuts down that idea by saying that somehow it would be against the teaching of Karl Marx to make the company owned by the workers. He's eventually given a management position, so yeah, that's about where that stands. Nothing really significant comes of these campfire meetings as far as I can tell. Another detail is that after Kender had left, who was very pro-sobriety, the company brings back in events with alcohol. It used to be a dry company, but most events involved some sort of liquor after Kender left. I can't speak for any specific details, but as Tulik and Klinzik mentioned, it seems like the alcohol was a good way for management to help funnel information upwards in the company. Get everyone loosened up with a few drinks and the gossiping begins, I guess. I feel like there'd be a pretty overt anti-alcohol sentiment within the company after seeing what it did to Harry Dubois, but what do I know? Now we get into another player added to the executive suite at Zaum, with the introduction of Ed Tomaszewski as the president of Zaum. No one ends up losing their positions in the executive suite, but Tomaszewski is brought in by Kender before he was fired, and officially joined after Kender was removed. Tomaszewski was originally involved with the video game publisher Private Division from 2015 to 2022, and had the role as business manager under the Kerbal Space Program IP. Now, I don't know the specifics of it, and there's probably a whole other story as big as this one, but he seemed to have a bit of a hand in the mismanagement of Kerbal Space Program too, which was put out in early access but then cancelled in the middle of development with an extremely rocky launch. I'm not well read enough on this stuff, but I can say he has a bit of a shady background with some other video game studios. From what I could tell though, between him, Tonus Havel, and Ilmar Compass, he's the only one who actually had experience in the gaming field. He had as a bit of a charismatic bumper for them, and was actually kind of competent in comparison to the others. He can be a shark, but at least he's a shark who actually knows something about video games. Apparently when he joined Zaum, he was looking at about 18 to 20 projects that they had running, and helped cut it down to 4. If I'm to speculate, those projects would be C4 and X7, which I've discussed earlier, and P1 and M0, which I'll be getting into shortly. Tulik and Klinzik didn't have a ton of great things to say about his character, but they did mention quite a bit about how professional and competent he was as a businessman in Zaum. So we get into where things start to get a little bit stranger with Project X7. There's a bit of ambiguity on who's leading the X7 project at the time, with Chris Priestman, who is now a principal writer at Zaum, being given an administrative counterpart position to Argo, Tulik, and Dora Klinzik, similar to how Kurvitz and Rostov had an administrative counterpart position in Justin Keenan and Casper Tomsolu. Alarm bells are probably ringing in your head right now, as they should be. Another person brought into the company is a producer by the name of Phil Davidson. There's not much you need to know about Phil Davidson, except for the fact that he was given a management position to oversee Project X7, and for some reason relating to him getting screwed in a previous company earlier in his life, he had a significant issue with creative types. In the past, he was in a company where people didn't listen to him, and the company lost about $15 million because of that. He also ends up essentially acting as the right-hand man to Tonus Havel. I know, a lot of names floating around. Just remember, Chris Priestman is basically doing the administrative and more paperwork-heavy stuff for Tulik and Klinzik, and Phil Davidson is essentially acting as a handler for the X7 project. Phil Davidson was pushing for production, as Tulik said, and there was almost immediately an adversarial relationship between Davidson and Tulik and Klinzik. There's a few more small arguments and things that happen with Tulik and Klinzik over management in different projects, but the next really significant thing is the release of Collage Mode. I don't know who was working on Collage Mode at the time. I know it's none of the people I've been talking about so far. Tulik and Klinzik hadn't even heard of it until right before its release in March of 2023, but obviously it doesn't end up being received well from the community. If you don't know, Collage Mode was essentially a sticker book mode of Disco Elysium that was released as a free update, allowing you to make little scenes with the assets in the game. The thing is, it was kind of really bad. It had some really sketchy and poorly written lore additions to the game. It was almost kind of queerbaiting to try and win back the goodwill of the community by showing Harry and Kim kissing in a lot of the promotional material for it. The concept was created by Thomas Havel apparently, which is kind of obvious by how tone deaf it is, and it was received really badly by the community, creating another massive wave of backlash at Zaum. X7 have been trying hard to rebuild morale within the team, and this just caused another collapse within the company. There's also some weird stuff in the EULA agreement for Collage Mode, stating that everything made within Collage Mode is technically owned by Zaum. Tulik and Klinzik end up going to have a meeting in Brighton with Zaum with Ed Tomaszewski and Thomas Havel to discuss the Collage Mode fire, and also going over some rumors that there's a People Make Games documentary about Zaum in the works, and that Ilmar Compass is going to be going in for an interview with them. Tulik and Klinzik had this meeting with Tomaszewski and Havel, where one of the first pieces of news they get is that Compass had the interview with People Make Games, and he thinks it went really well. This worried the X7 team a good bit, and it began to make Tulik feel as though he should also appear in People Make Games documentary, which he does, and we'll talk about that later on. Lots of later ons here, been planting a lot of seeds, but I swear I'll go over it all. Tulik and Klinzik managed to get the idea about how bad the optics are to Tomaszewski, somewhat shaming Havel throughout the discussion because he doesn't really have the same experience with games that Tomaszewski and the others had. As a result of this, the Disco Creative Feedback Committee is created to try and prevent other tone-deaf things like Collage Mode from being made. It doesn't really go anywhere, unfortunately, and just kind of becomes another executive echo chamber. The next part of the story is when the People Make Games documentary was being made, which was a deep dive into the Zaum situation up to that point, especially the parts relating to Kurvitz and the stock situation. Argo Tulik ends up showing up here to have a segment on the documentary, along with Justin Keenan, Kasper Tomsulu, and Petteri Sulanen as a representation of workers within Zaum. Ilmar Compass obviously had his segment as well, along with interviews with Helen Hindbeer, Robert Kurvitz, and Alexander Rostov. Compass ends up looking really bad from the whole thing, giving off very, very executive energy to the audience, with his only defenses being a good amount of deflection and leaning on the fact that it is probably maybe technically legal. Kurvitz, Rostov, and Hindbeer are a bit shocked by the mentioning of the accusations of a toxic workplace activity, but they stick to their arguments that they were not involved with the stock exchange and that they think it is fraud and that the IP is being stolen. The interviews from Zaum members, especially Tulik, do a good job of showing that there are still actual people working at Zaum though, and the release of the documentary helps to bolster morale within Zaum and makes Tulik very well liked within the company, a bit to the chagrin of management since Compass did not come across nearly as well. Within the company, the PMG doc has received mixed results. It was looked at with a bit of anger early on since it didn't portray Kurvitz in the most perfect of lights that the community may wanted it to, but it's genuinely a very good piece of journalism, and I think it does an effective job at looking at things from all perspectives, even the ones people may not want to hear. I tend to lean towards Kurvitz's side of things, mostly because I've never been a fan of executive meddling, but I think people tend to ignore that the documentary does too. It's one of the first examples of this information being made public, and it's definitely one of the most well put together and comprehensive. At least for the time, more information has come out now, and I'm trying my best to do a good job of putting it all together, but I'm no Chris Pratt or People Make Games. Now, the cat's officially out of the bag here, though. People Make Games have the documentary out, and whatever extent the situation has been kept under wraps is completely undone by now. Fortunately for Argo Tulik, according to himself at least, he ends up coming across as one of the better-looking figures within the company. He seems to think he was sent to do the interview to give Zaum a sense of legitimacy, as he is one of the few remaining members of Zaum that had done a significant amount of work on Disco Elysium the game. After the documentary released, he became a bit of an important figure within the company, at least to others. Some people remarking to Thomas Havel that Tulik had saved his company. Obviously, he didn't end up taking that too terribly well, and it only furthered tensions between the X7 team and management. And now we get into arguably one of the funniest things that happened over the entire situation. Thomas Havel decided the X17 needed a little motivation, so our ever-brilliant, inspiring leader puts together a little something called How Zaum Makes Games. It's an all-hands presentation for the X7 team to give them a little bit of productivity boost, with Phil Davidson, the right-hand man to Thomas Havel, watching alongside them. What exactly was the How Zaum Makes Game presentation, you may ask? What a boon of knowledge did Mr. Havel have for this adept team of writers, some of whom had made Disco Elysium, arguably one of the best written video games of all time? Well, my dear viewers, Mr. Havel decided that what they all really needed was was a video presentation from none other than the beginner's game development channel, Game Maker's Toolkit. Now, I don't know what specific video they showed, something about narrative design and how it can be integrated into gameplay. The video I think they were talking about is how level design can tell a story, which for all intents and purposes is a really damn well put together video, don't get me wrong, but this is a team of professionals. Game Maker's Toolkit makes phenomenal videos, but they're geared towards new developers and gamers who are interested in how games are made. People like me, for example. Not a team of writers with years and years of experience under the belts and the fantastic creations such as Disco Elysium as a part of their resume. Obviously, everyone was mildly offended by the whole thing, and the only pair of hands clapping in the room at the end of the presentation was that of Phil Davidson. This little side tangent doesn't have a whole ton of lot to do with what happened overall, but I think it's pretty funny, and it put a little bit of a chip on Tonis Havel's shoulder, seeing how everyone basically gave him a pat on the back for essentially giving a group of professional painters a tutorial on how to draw anime faces. Neat, but wrong crowd there, buddy. Now's the time to mention another project in the works at Sound, which is Project P1. Project P1 was a sci-fi project that Sound was working on for a time around the exodus of Kurvitz and others. Remember the IP that Ilmar Compass bought and sold back to the company for a shitload of money? That was P1, originally coined by Kaderblast. It was only a series of sketches at the time, but it ended up becoming a legitimate project at the company shortly afterwards. Jim Ashalevi, the voice acting director for Disco Elysium: The Final Cut, essentially directing the voice actors, and Lemble Brown, the narrator for Disco, on how to deliver lines to get their work done, was put in charge of the P1 project, but apparently while Kyle Kender was still around at the company, Kender was heavily interfering and micromanaging the project. There isn't much actually known about what the game would have been, but apparently it had some really good music and concept art created for it during development, but struggled to get off the ground due to scope creep and poor management. Jim Ashalevi wasn't a writer or director for Disco Elysium, so allegedly he struggled with managing a project as large as that. After Kyle Kender ended up leaving the studio, the project was stuck in limbo as it was originally his idea, and people didn't seem to know what to do with it. So, unsurprisingly, shortly after the Zound Makes Games incident, Project P1 was cancelled by Ed Tomaszewski after seeing how it was beginning to dwindle. The Q&A about the cancellation of P1 was made in an all-hands, week-long, 2 for the X7 team, gathering at Porto, Portugal about a week later. The Q&A wasn't handled supremely well, to the surprise of no one, with questions being answered badly to try and save face for the executives, only serving to make Tonis Havel look even worse as he keeps dancing around questions instead of answering them honestly. Answering questions somewhat adjacent to the question, taking very long and then saying, "Does that answer your question?" leaving people confused and just agreeing out of concession. Another major thing that occurred at the Porto meeting was the showcase of the X7 project that I was talking about earlier, the one that ended up getting leaked online. It was very positively received, with the X7 being the project at Sound with the furthest development at the time. If you can find it, take a look, but I kinda want this video to stand for a while, so I can't show any of it. Sorry about that. After the Porto showcase, the P1 team is officially split up between Project C4, who got about 30% of the workers, and Project X7, who got roughly 70% of the team. Now, this might sound like a good thing on paper, but there's a bit of a problem when you offload a bunch of people from one project onto another all at once. They don't know how to work on the new project. So now the X7 team has significantly more people on it who all need to be trained and working on a completely different workflow than before, slowing down production. They eventually get over the hurdle, but I think this should serve as a bit of an example to viewers how throwing money and developers at a project doesn't make it go faster most of the time. Eventually, sure, but training takes a while, and the more people present on a project can actually slow development rather than speed it up. Sometimes video games just take time, so please for the love of God stop complaining about Silksong taking too long. To be fair, I have some issues with Team Cherry's complete and total lack of communication, but the timeline on Silksong makes sense, and I don't have any issues with its development being this long. So X7 is once again in a good workflow, yay, but executive restructuring, no! Technically, at the time, Chris Priestman, the administrative counterpart to Klinzik at Tulik, is in charge of X7, and that's leading to some confusion amongst the writing team, seeing as Tulik and Klinzik are creatively overseeing the project. The company begins a series of corporate restructuring meetings, essentially annoying the shit out of Tulik and Klinzik as development comes to a screeching halt, and they're forced to sit through meeting after meeting to try and justify why they should be put in a position in charge of the project that they came up with in the first place. Yay, corporate hoops. So, while retroactively seems like a mistake, but should absolutely not have to have been one, Tulik and Klinzik take some of their vacation days, as they don't see these meetings going anywhere for a long time. Unfortunately for them, during their absence, the restructuring happens underneath them, and they're put into lower positions of the company, and unsurprisingly, those close to the executives are given higher roles. Jim Ashalevi, who originally led Project P1, is put in charge of the Project X7 during this restructuring. Now, I don't think Ashalevi is a bad person or anything like that, and this isn't an attack on his character, but according to Tulik, he was asking very, very rudimentary questions on game development significantly into the development of Project P1, and he didn't have any role on Disco where he actually developed the game. He just didn't seem to have the experience required to run X7 at the time, and the project has left off worse for it. A system is set up for X7 where teams are cordoned off from one another, and everything has to be pushed through project leads to get information between the different teams, such as writing, development, and art. Pretty dumb if you ask me, seeing as what made Disco flourish was that strong connection between the arts, but this isn't how Western game development is done according to the executives, and that's how they want to do it. Tulik is realizing how screwed the development for Project X7 is getting, so he decides to pull a Hail Mary at this point, seeing as things aren't going anywhere good anytime soon, and the company seems to want him and Klinzik out. Tulik suggests, knowing full well that the executive suite won't go for it, to bring back in Kurvitz and Rostov as consultants for the X7 project. As a response, Tulik receives a letter from Ed Tomaszewski essentially threatening his career for even making a suggestion like that. It's honestly pretty funny, seeing as Tomaszewski never even met Kurvitz and Rostov. He was brought into the company as president after they left. Guess the executives don't talk about much else. Tulik realizes that however bad that letter is to him though, it makes Tomaszewski seem way worse, so he writes his own letter in response. I don't think anything significant came of it, but it exacerbated tension between them so badly that I think this directly caused something I'll get into in just a second. So, then X7 hits a bit of a crunch period, as Havel wants a playable demo and soon. The company tries to set up an anti-crunch policy, but they still want the work done, so it essentially just exists as a "this is not our responsibility" shield. Crunch still occurs because, as some people may not know, crunch is rarely directly demanded by the company. There isn't a crunch button the executives hit. What happens is they place unreasonable deadlines on the team and everyone feels this pressure and responsibility to get the work done. And technically, yeah, you don't have to crunch, but you don't want everyone else to pick up your slack if you're not working extra hard, so you take those extra hours. X7 ends up putting out a lot of content during this period for the game, but according to Klinzik, it's hard to call it anything more than that. It's not up to the standards that the team wishes it was, but hey, it's getting put out there. On top of all of this, Klinzik places heavily researched and well-scripted complaints to HR about mistreatment by the company, specifically in the department of misogyny and favoritism. Of course, as everyone should know about HR, they are not your friends, and it just gets fast-tracked to the executives. As a response, Jim Ashlevi, current X7 lead, places a counter-complaint against Tulik and Klinzik, accusing them of being toxic within the workplace and abuse. Ashlevi takes off right around that time, quitting shortly after with Thomas Havel taking over Project X7 in his place. Jesus fucking Christ. Havel, who has literally zero experience working on any video games whatsoever, is the lead of the X7 project. Yikes. So, of course, shortly after that, Project X7 is cancelled with very little fanfare. Rest in peace, the one Zaum title that I think probably would have been good. The entire X7 team is made redundant in a series of very sloppily put together firings, despite being told a few months ago that finances are fine within the company. The official reason X7 was cancelled, according to the executives, is that there might not be a market for it when it's completed, which is obviously horseshit. The real reason is tension towards Klinzik and Tulik, who are basically necessary for the project to be completed. Allegedly. I'm assuming here, but like, come on, it's pretty obvious. Before they are officially fired, Tulik and Klinzik decide to go ahead and throw the final nail in the coffin themselves by going to the press about the whole thing, solidifying their departure from the company. Tulik and Klinzik get help from a local union to leave the company, managing to exit with a bit of grace. They wanted out anyways, but according to their union official, with how badly the firing process was done, without any good reasons, there's a very good chance they could have found other jobs in the company, seeing as redundancies just make the position redundant. X7 may have been cancelled, but they still needed writers on other projects, and there wasn't any good reasons as to why they couldn't be made writers on the other projects, seeing as they had quite enough experience. Regardless, they left the company anyways. I don't blame them, I wouldn't want to have much to do with Zaum at that point either. There's a series of fun redundancy parties that Klinzik made some pretty sick trailers for if you want to take a look on the 41st Precinct YouTube channel for that. And in a very interesting twist of irony, the remaining members of Zaum are given very small stock in the company in something called the Employee Equity Act. Every worker a member of the board, I guess, especially when the company is the biggest shitter it could be and struggling to hold itself together. And with all of that, we come to a conclusion on all the information presented in Zaum the Inside Story. Obviously, I cut out a lot because it either didn't have much to do with the company as a whole and more to do with Tulik and Klinzik's personal stories in this, but I think it did an alright job summarizing. The unfortunate part now is I ran out of good sources for the rest of this, so what I have scrounged together is from various articles, social media posts, and the websites of various other companies. This is right around the time that the Zaum spiritual successors began to pop up, so we shift off of Zaum the company right about now, but trust me, plenty of the members from the company are still very important in what is going on with all of this. So, let's start with whatever happened to Kurvitz and Rostov. This one is brief, there isn't much known about it at all. After leaving Zaum, they got together and started the company Red Info, with funding from the Chinese internet company NetEase. I have no idea who's working there. Allegedly, Martin Luiga used to be there, but now he's moved on to another company, Longdew, who are making Hopetown. Some say that Helen Hindpier is there, but I don't have any confirmation about that. Just seen that mentioned in some comments on random threads, so take that with less than a grain of salt. Red Info was founded in June of 2022 and still exists, but they haven't gone public about anything or announced any projects. They have a trademark put out for a project called Corinthians, so maybe that's the next game they're going to work on, but it's still dead quiet over there, which makes sense. I'm fairly certain they're still involved in the legal battle with Zaum over the Disco Elysium IP. We'll see what they come up with. Robert Kurvitz and Alexander Rostov are both brilliant writers and artists, but if they can't pull back Elysium or unshackle themselves from the legal trouble they're in with Zaum, I don't see anything coming out of Red Info anytime soon. Shame. I know there's some amazing world building in those minds, and I really hope we can get something from them eventually. I told you that'd be short. Now we move on to the next company chronologically somewhat, with Dark Math Games. Founded in April of 2023 with Kaur Kender as one of the pioneering leaders of the company, and from what I can tell, the progenitor of the main project they're working on right now, a spiritual successor to Disco Elysium titled XXX Night Shift. The company is funded by Group, an Estonian investment company that gave them funding up into the 7 figures. Tuulik and Klinzik were hired as contracted writers there, the ones who created X7, after their exodus from Zaum. Neither of them stuck around for very long though, the two of them claiming to have been fired from the company while other sources claiming that they left voluntarily after their contracts ran out. Tuulik alleges that Kender acted inappropriately within the company, showing around pictures of his naked ex-wife as some kind of reference for a character in XXX Night Shift, which tells you a lot about the project itself, as I'll go into in just a second. Kender claims that the pictures were just in a bikini, but even if you're inclined to believe him, which I am not, that still has some weird implications for what kind of game they're making. Tuulik and Klinzik also both mentioned that the company has the same shut up and start writing approach without any preparation that Zaum had, so yeah, not much of this is looking too great. Regardless, Darkmath and Tuulik have both stated that they don't want anyone to look into the past and are no longer engaged in any kind of conflict, so let bygones be bygones, I suppose. And it's totally fine to let bygones be bygones for the personal conflict between Darkmath and Tuulik and Klinzik, but that doesn't mean I'm super excited or optimistic about what Darkmath is making. You know the term cautiously optimistic? I'm whatever the opposite of that is. Hopefully pessimistic or whatever. Maybe they'll make something good, but I've got a bit of laundry list of issues with XXX Night Shift that make me worry about what they're producing. XXX Night Shift, I'm just gonna call it Night Shift from now on, it's stumbling me over my words, is one of the furthest along of all the Disco Elysium spiritual successors, and they managed to actually have a Steam page and trailer out at the moment, with gameplay screenshots to boot. I'm pretty confident that a game is going to come out of the company, but the quality of it is a bit sketchy. It's supposed to be a gritty detective game taking place in a sci-fi future setting. Antarctica in 2086 CE according to the Steam page. One of the first things that worried me about the project was an announcement given by Timo Albert, who was a motion graphic designer at Zaum during the time of Disco Elysium, doing animations for the game, but now he's moved on to work at Darkmath. Albert said this: "Additionally to innovating the traditional RPG mechanics, we'll bring something fresh to the table. You will see. And of course, a few less words, a few more bullets, perhaps. In total, a lot more fun." The statement gives off minor red flags, not big ones, but little ones that stack up over time. I'm glad to see that they're trying to pull in new things. Everyone knows that remaking Disco without most of the team who worked on it is nearly impossible, so finding ways to stand out can work wonders for any of the spiritual successors that are in development. My problem is with the a little less words and a few more bullets. I might be presuming a bit much here, but I think I can go ahead and say that people didn't leave Disco Elysium wanting less text and more combat. The biggest strength that Disco had was that it didn't get bogged down in traditional RPG mechanics such as the combat system and was able to just let the writing shine. I think there's a good reason they're taking that approach though, and I think it's because Night Shift is going to be a lot more style than substance. To give them props where props are due, they have the style down pat. Like, this game looks good. I can feel the energy of the world they're trying to make, and every part of the game that I've been shown is just dripping with aesthetic, along with all of the voice acting shown so far to be pretty damn good. But the writing, hey guys, I think we're gonna have to mention the writing. Now, Kender was closely involved with Project C4, which was the Zaum project which had issues with the female characters obviously written by a man syndrome. And now we have Kender walking around showing his scantily to not at all clad ex-wife as a reference for characters. Like, come on, that is about as divorced as you can get. Like, we're reaching pathetically sad levels of divorced man here. Along with the game starting as you, the female protagonist, waking up in your underwear in a giant-ass bed, and one of the first options to approach your day is taking it as cute and cuddly. You're playing as what they call a patrol op, by the way. Not to mention, there seems to be something called body count as a skill that you can upgrade in the skills menu. Jeez, okay. Most of the stuff that I said about C4 applies here, so I'm not going to restate much, but misogyny, yada yada yada, doesn't look too good. If I'm playing an RPG, I don't just want to play as someone's sex fantasy. I want to play as a real, like, female character. Women can be real characters. You just have to write them well, like any other character. I mean, just as I'm writing this, I go over to the Steam page and I see a quote from some female character on the recent devlog that reads, "I have nothing to offer but blow, BJs, and cash." Like, come on! Apparently, the XXX and XXX Night Shift means exactly what it looks like. Not to mention, the game is supposed to be $60 on release, which is just an insane asking price. Probably gonna pass on that one. Okay, so, recording note, I read more of that devlog, and we're gonna have to put a pause on the video real quick because, holy crap, this is some writing. This was put out in May of 2025, and I'm gonna have to go unscripted and dive a bit through this here because this is bad. This is really bad. Okay, so this opens up. This is a comic apparently taking place in the universe of XXX Night Shift, XXX Night Shift, XXX. It's a tongue twister. I can't say it very well. That's not a real complaint about the game. But okay. So one of the biggest problems I'm seeing in this is it's crass for the sake of being crass. I mean, you got communism, fuck the rich people, I added that one, but they do basically say fuck the root. Okay, between work and dick sucking, I always found room for sex. And a little extra money to eat their pussies or asses or suck their. I'm gonna get demonetized for this. Oh boy, you could say that I've fucked around. Oh, and then there's the bit of this where every single time they say something about like fucking and dicks and ass, just every single like character written as the audience just thundering applause. It's just like, and all of you in this hall know, except you, and you. I love dick. I love sucking dick, eating pussy and ass. And then it just says thundering laughter and applause. Thank you. I'm not that good. Thank you. Laughter continues. Applaud rolls on. They're adding like exclamation points to the end of this too. Everyone stands up. Okay, I am that good. Laughter and clapping. It's just, it's like, look at our writing. Look at how cool we are. Look at how cool communist, like, we're bad boys. Fuck the system, am I right? Fucking and dicks and sex and... This is what an idiot thinks that Disco Elysium is. This is like, if someone played Disco Elysium and just didn't have a single brain cell between their ears, they would come out of Disco Elysium thinking it's communism and like sex jokes. It's not great. And then they've got, oh boy, then they got the whole thing where it's talking about how like capitalist systems, oh right, the fucking smartphone section. Oh boy. There's a whole section about the smartphone was created to prevent people from having sex. Like it's like because they created a bunch of dating apps, and they just create like slightly different names. Oh right, and then they make the like haha joke. Look at how many names apps have. You got Tinder, Swinger, Gringer, Bumble, Zumble, Blower, Gunbunger. Like it's. Called it a sophisticated version of a chastity belt. I'm rambling here. This is gonna be a long section of the video over nothing, but it's just talking about how like, oh, everybody made apps and now people don't have sex together normally anymore. And now everyone in the audience, once again, you got the audience, laughter, clapping, all that shit, roaring applause and trampling of feet and applause. Boundaries, my no real character says boundaries, my big pretty ass, and then everyone like laughs. It's like, haha, she does have a big pretty ass. Get it? This is a woman who likes sex and she's talking. Oh man. Yeah, oh no, it's talking about how like porn. Is it talking about how porn's ruining things? Yeah, no, it's like how AI generated sex ruins normal sex, which like, I mean, I agree with the things they're saying, like not really, kind of. Not the sex parts. I agree with the like, wow, we have too much AI in the world and the people are not social enough, because that's just like, it's obvious. It's a bit more nuanced, but like it's obvious. Yes, people are too addicted to their cell phones and all. Like this is an obvious problem people have. But the way they're saying it is making me want to say, no, they're not. No, they're not actually. I don't think people should be. I think people should be more addicted to their cell phone, because if the argument is this way, like it's like they're strawmanning themselves. It's kind of fucking crazy. Like, if anyone saw this argument that was even slightly against any of the positions they had relating to communism and all this stuff, they would immediately be infinitely more against it, rather than what Disco Elysium did, is it provided a grounded and consistent understanding of why these people act the way that they do in relation to politics. Like, the fascism route. I don't support fascism, but I understand why people would be fascist after playing the fascist route. I understood some of the other reasons too beforehand, but it makes sense. It is a pining for the past. It's nostalgia. Everyone has that. Not everyone becomes a fascist, but it makes sense why someone would turn to something so awful and dangerous and terrible as a result of just being a broken human being. It's not because they're inherently evil. No one is inherently evil all the way through. But this thing, it's just like, it makes me not like the side that I stand for, which is a more leftist side. I don't know. Still talking about cell phones. Oh, right. And there's the fact that they decided that it takes place on Earth, which is... I don't know how much I like that idea. I mean, Disco Elysium... I mean, I guess you can make something take place on Earth in the future, but it makes it to where you are building on actual real-life world building for this. Like, they made it take place in 2086, which is not too terribly far in the future. So if you're doing political things in relation to a game, it has to be based on real world politics things. Karl Marx is a real person and was important to communism. Adolf Hitler was a real person and is important to the development of fascism and racism in the like world. And that is a touchy subject if you don't know how to do it right. And I don't know if they know how to do it right. Judging by the writing here, I don't. I'm looking at this stuff right here. I don't even know if I can show all this stuff. But it's talking about they're dripping strangers' DNA from every orifice. That's awful. That's all. I don't want to read that. Like I'm not even a prude. It's just gross. It's boring and gross. It's not like interesting. It really reminds me. So Kaurkender was the one who wrote this, and I'm gonna get into something about Kaurkender later. There's a fucking crazy bit that he put into this comic that is just like, holy shit, this makes me angry. But Kaurkender is he allegedly wrote Untitled 12. He's claiming that it was actually Robert Kurvitz who wrote it, but after reading this, I am much more inclined to believe that it is Kaurkender who wrote Untitled 12, which is a gratuitous, nasty book that is basically, I don't know if I can say it on YouTube, but it shows children in terrible, awful, awful situations as the result of certain kinds of abuse. And his argument is that it's like, oh, it's for artistic merit. But from everything I've seen, I haven't read it, but I'm just going to assume it's probably just gross for the sake of being gross. It's just like, hey, I'm shocking you. Isn't this shocking? And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, you could be shocking, but you're not saying anything. And it's just boring and makes me uncomfortable. I don't know if it makes, like, not really uncomfortable. It's just like, why is this here? It just feels juvenile. And then there's the bit where Kaurkender is canonically a person in the XXX Night Shift universe. Yeah. Like I was scrolling through it, I first read it, and I saw there's a comic strip and it shows Kender Street, and I'm like, there's no way he named a street after himself. And then they mention, like there's this paragraph right here from the character who's reading. What's her name? It's at the top. Some like, she's Xenia Titanen. She is a like communist revolutionary for like a group of young people. I read this. I understand what I'm looking at. She's like a leftist communist revolutionary for a group of young people who are focusing. I understand the argument here. It's like these are young people who do not understand their place in the world, so they're pushing against the system. It is counterculture. So they lean into these ideas of like, yeah, we're just going to be gratuitously like pro-sex, pro all these things that the world tells us aren't great because I'm against the world. The world has just pushed me down. I understand what he's saying. It's just not good. He's not doing a good job of writing it because it's just so much in your face. It's just like, haha, sex, am I right, guys? And then everyone claps. But back on topic, I'm so easily distracted by stuff. So, yeah, this lady, Zenon Titanen, I think I just read her name. Is that it? Xenia Titanen. I'm terrible. This is non-memorable characters. So she's given this talk to a bunch of other people here, and she mentions, she's like, today London's hottest borough is by far Lewisham. Where is it, you ask? Exactly. Who would have thought at the beginning of the century that it would have a Kender Street named after my dad, a quasi-famous writer and maker of the video game Techno Asylum? I'm sorry. I just blew into my microphone. But okay, for one, naming a street after yourself in a video game or a comic related to the video game, I don't know if this will actually show up in the game, not that bad. Sure, like little developer Easter egg. Making yourself canonically the father of a major character. Ooh, you're getting into some territory here. But then the gall to say that your self-insert character is the creator of the famous video game Techno Asylum, which doesn't exactly rhyme with Disco Elysium, but it basically, like, it's Disco Elysium, music genre, like heaven, place of Disco Elysium means like, I forget what it means. It means to learn Elysium. That's the original translation of it. It was the introduction to the world of Elysium. But it's also like disco, the genre of music, and Elysium, the like fields of Elysium, a place of sanctuary. And then there's techno, a musical genre, and asylum, a place of sanctuary. Oh, look, and he's claiming he made it? Kaurkender did not make Disco Elysium. He is not listed as a writer on Disco Elysium. I think he contributed maybe a little bit of world building, and he was important to the creation of Disco Elysium, as I mentioned earlier in the video. But he's not. He didn't make it. He didn't fucking make it, and that's the shit that Yeah, no, I'm not happy about that. I'm really upset about that. The gall to put that in there and be like, I'm the guy who made this, by the way. Because if people don't understand the whole situation, they're just going to assume, oh, this is a studio created after the Disco Elysium studio disappeared. It has writers of Disco Elysium talking about this Kender guy. He seems pretty important. He must have made the game. He's the guy who made the game. It's just fucking whatever. And then it ends with one of the last sentences being, "And may the fuck be with you." Tumultuous, lasting applause. Everyone stands up. And I think that about sums up everything about this. The words, "May the fuck be with you," and then everyone claps. I'm not excited for XXX Night Shift. I was cautiously thinking that, oh, this might be an okay game beforehand. This won't be a good game. This is going to be a bad game. Unless Kaderblast was kicked off of it. So I'm getting back to the script right now. My kilter rambling has just ended. So Kaderblast is officially listed as off of the company. So he is maybe not working on XXX Night Shift anymore. And his brother, Heidi Kender, has taken over as director. I don't really know what that means, but everything relating to this, all the writing, it reeks of Kaderblast. He's listed as the writer at the bottom of this comic. So either he set this all up really, like, clearly a while ago, and this comic is just releasing now. It released as of, it doesn't say when the devlog was released in May of 2025. It doesn't say it doesn't say when it was written, but it was released in May of 2025. So either he wrote this a long time ago and it's just now released now, or he's still creatively involved. And I think it's probably the latter. I'm really sorry. I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt earlier, but just leave it alone. Dark Math Games is not making anything worthwhile, as far as I can tell. And that wraps up Dark Math Games. Oh boy, let's move on to Longdo. Oh boy. Okay, so this is the Disco Spiritual successor company that you guys probably have heard the most about, Longdo Games, which is owned by the company Cogrammer, which you may have heard about. They are a coding programming website that does programming tutorials, and we'll get into their programming tutorial stuff in a little bit. They had some problems with that. But the game they're working on right now is called Hopetown, with the general story seeming to be that you're some rich person's kid, the middle child of the family. You're a journalist currently stationed at a town with a mining operation as its central economy, which is described as a powder keg on the company's website. From what I could tell, it seems to be picking up on some very basic class commentary, with you being born from wealth and getting put in a town that's primarily working class people. From the trailer, which is beautifully voice acted by the narrator of Disco Elysium, Lendl Brown, I'm getting the vibes that the story is going to see our protagonist get to know the townsfolk around her and understand how those in positions of power and wealth, the people who are supposed to be her people, completely and totally fucked over the town in the past, or something like that. From what Lendl was saying, it seems like the protagonist has been sent to quell some tensions or rebellion against the upper class from the working class, and she's not doing a very good job, acting more as a flamethrower and fueling the fire and aligning herself with the proletariat and not being the fire blanket she is supposed to be. The story sounds fine from what I'm reading into it. Maybe it ends up being more interesting, but the whole thing reads as a little bit of milquetoast, you know? I mean, just read the description of the game on the Steam page. Hopetown is a narrative-first isometric RPG with psychological complexity, resonant storytelling, and seismic conversations. Things will change under your nose and under your heel. Words will be your weapons, and you'll make your own truth. Half of the words used in that description are just buzzwords. Big words thrown around that don't mean very much at all. I mean, make your own truth is used more often to make fun of pretentious writing that says nothing at all than it is used as a genuine turn of phrase in some kind of writing. And if you take a look at some of the people involved with Longdo, those vibes continue to click. They have Grant Roberts as the narrative director in the studio, who used to be the lead writer at Bungie and Rocksteady, helping to push out the game Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. He ended up leaving before it was finished, though, judging by his LinkedIn page. But still, he put a good amount of work into it, and that game was critically panned, I'm pretty sure. Let me check. Review. Yeah, no, it wasn't good. 2.4 stars, 30%, 5 out of 10 on IGN, 60% on Metacritic. Okay, I wouldn't give it that. The CEO of Longdu is a millionaire tech investor by the name of Riaz Mullah, who has a whole unfortunate history that I'll get into that makes me very worried for the company. So if you remember Argo Tulik and Dora Klinzik from Zaum, well, after they left Dark Math Games, they took a job at Cogrammer, the studio that founded Longdu. They were working there before Longdu was founded and before Hopetown began work, consultants for some kind of game that was going to be made. Hopetown is the one being thrown around right now, but that doesn't make too much sense as Tulik claims that he resigned before Longdu was officially founded, which checks out with the documents. September 23rd was his resignation, and on September 25th, Longdu was founded. Maybe Hopetown was in the works before Longdu was founded, but I'm inclined to believe Tulik and Klinzik. My take is most likely they were brought into Cogrammer with plans for them to work on a project before it came to be. According to the resignation letter that Tulik shared on his Twitter, he was listed as research and development game developer in consulting. So essentially what happened between them and Riaz Mullah is that Tulik and Klinzik were planning to launch their own company, which is now officially launched, entitled Summer Eternal. Don't worry, we'll go over it in a second. It's personally my favorite of the spiritual successor companies. Riaz Mullah noticed that Tulik had 2 game studios under his name, one unnoticed, which most likely went on to be Summer Eternal, and another one named Nautilus Terminal OU, which I have no clue about. I've not seen any follow-up, and if Argo Tulik, if you are watching this video and you're allowed to tell me, maybe just like, actually, no, never mind. You're probably not allowed to tell me, and it's probably weird legal mumbo jumbo that I don't understand. But I am curious. So like, if you're watching the video, just be like, it's cool that you're curious. I don't know. If you're watching this video, that's really cool. Okay, my script is blown up off the rails. But I really like your stuff, and I like all the Summer Eternal things. And I'm hoping that someone involved with something here is watching this video and is glad about it. And if people who are watching it aren't glad about it, that are other people that I've not spoken too kindly on, I'm sorry. I don't know you. I don't personally have a problem with you. But I mean, I hope you see how I could have come to the conclusions I have. I'm working with the information that has been presented, and no one else has come forward. So if other people want to come forward, come in for an interview, come in to talk with me, I'm definitely down. I'm not a professional. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just making a video based on things that I saw and that other people haven't made a video. So if someone else wants to get on top of that and maybe look like an idiot, you can go make me look like an idiot. But since no one else is talking, I'm going to be the first one to do it. Tangent aside, so Riaz Mullah made a list of demands after finding out about these companies as a part of a release contract for Tulik and Klinzik, which would release them from their contracts at Cogrammer, which had a arguably legally binding non-compete clause within it. The demands are listed below, and as you can see, most of them are focused on slowing the release of Summer Eternal as not to take attention away from Longdu, along with giving Mullah a position to profit from whatever Summer Eternal ends up producing via a C-suite position at the company. Now, timeline stuff is tricky here, but it seems like at first the company was questioning Tulik about his breach of contract, which stated he would not accept an offer of employment from a direct competitor while being with the company for 6 months afterwards. The thing is, I think he's maybe technically legally in the right here. He didn't accept any offer from any competitor. He founded his own company, which he is self-employed at, and once again, he didn't take any offers. Now, I may be wrong here. I'm certainly not a lawyer, but that's just how I'm reading the wording of it. Then, Summer Eternal launched, and Mullah made his list of demands that they needed to follow, or else things would go to court. Mullah also accused Tulik of showing a playable demo of Zaum's Y12 game at some point, like the canceled Disco Elysium sequel, if you remember that. Well, Riaz Mullah accused Argo Tulik of showing it around on a USB stick at Cogrammer, which Zaum asked to be returned and destroyed as a part of a confidentiality breach, once they became aware of that. Nothing legal came of it, and Tulik called it an absurd allegation from Riaz Mullah and said that the only people who claimed that or claimed that they have seen it was Riaz Mullah and his girlfriend, so I don't think there's terribly much substance behind the accusation. Anyways, Tulik and Klinzik refused to sign the release agreement with all of those demands from Mullah, so he filed an injunction against them, which nearly bankrupted Tulik and led to his fundraiser for the legal fees, which once again was shut down because I think he accidentally attached some things in there that were under NDA. I remember reading it before it was taken down. I didn't screenshot it, which I should learn to do for everything Disco Elysium. Things are just like, bang, shut down, but you know. Work was halted on Summer Eternal for 6 months via the injunction, and Tulik and Klinzik went into a legal battle against Longdu, which seems to have been resolved at this point, as Summer Eternal has resumed work after those 6 months, and there doesn't seem to be any more conflict going on between them, besides Tulik being very obviously still pissed off at Riaz Mullah and bringing up some of the newest problems they have, which I will get into in a second. These are very valid problems. Don't support Hopetown. Don't support Longdu. It's bad. It's bad. Make your own decisions. You can do what you want. I'm not going to support them. So, separate from all of that, Hopetown also had a very controversial Kickstarter. The game apparently had enough money to be funded from the get-go, and all the donations to the Kickstarter seemed to be very bot-like in nature, which Riazmula has been known for doing before based on some botted Reddit threads in the Disco Elysium subreddit, which ended up getting him banned. Essentially, he was responding to some accusations made against him that ended up getting thousands upon thousands of upvotes for no reason, and everyone who was responding to him was disagreeing with him. There was no support in the actual people you could see, but the numbers were high, so I mean, take from that what you will. Maybe he has an army of anonymous Riazmula fans, or he botted his Reddit account, which is really, it's fake internet points. Man, you're a millionaire. You don't need to be doing that. But yeah, the leading theory is that the Kickstarter only existed to build hype and momentum of the game, essentially astroturfing an indie game to make it seem like a lot of people are excited for it, when in reality the numbers are much lower than it seems. Also, if you remember Martin Luiga from Disco Elysium, the guy who was originally in the Overcoats and made that blog post from the Asylum calling out the bullshit that Zaum had done, he got hired at Longdo for 5,000 euros as some kind of consultant, and he's mentioned on the Longdo website, with the tag founding member of the Zaum Cultural Association and writer of 7 characters in Disco Elysium. Now, I'm entering speculation territory here, but I'm getting the vibes that he was brought in to give Longdo legitimacy more than actually being a major contributor to the game. Maybe he's being paid more over time, but 5,000 euros as a contracting fee is not a massive sum, and seems more like a paper trail to have him legally be at the company more than anything else. Not to mention the fact that Luiga has not been in the best place as of recently. I hope him the best. It doesn't seem terribly likely that he would be working on a game at this time, judging by some things relating to his mental health. Maybe I'm wrong here. I don't know him. Maybe he's doing completely fine. Do not assume things here. I've just seen other things from other people being mentioned. And with the low payment associated with it and the wording used on the website, it is screaming, look, we have a Disco Elysium guy, more than actually, this is a major contributor to the story of Hopetown. I mean, if he was, it probably would be good. That's a low blow. That's a low blow. Also, Riazmula was looking at investing into generative AI for game development, with things such as voices, text, and images all possibly being AI generated. The company has since backpedaled on the idea, but I mean, with the way that Mula talks about it, I got some pictures attached to it, that doesn't paint a great picture about his character. Also, Cogrammer, the company that founded Longdo, and Mula is the CEO of that, is currently engaged in a series of lawsuits relating to them charging money for what was supposed to be free coding boot camps. Cogrammer is the UK name for the studio, by the way. They also go by Hyperion Dev, so if you've heard of them based on their programming tutorials, maybe just avoid the whole shebang. It isn't great all the way up. They're supposed to make full payments as refunds for the charging people for free coding tutorials, but now they're suing the Department of Education over the whole thing, so we'll see how that melts down. Dear Lord, we got far away from Disco Elysium on this whole rabbit hole, but as I said at the beginning of the video, this entire thing goes deep, so let us course correct real quick. And now it is the Disco successor that I actually really like. Summer Eternal is a studio founded by previous Zaum employees and X7 project creators Argo Tulik and Dora Klinzik. The studio is built on the idea of artist solidarity, a lack of shareholder control, and learning shit from all the fucked up nonsense that ended up happening at Zaum. They used to have who was employed there listed on the website, including Lemble Brown, the Disco Elysium narrator, Anastasia Ivanova, who was the senior Disco Elysium concept artist, and Michael Oswell, who was a graphic designer on Disco Elysium, along with Tulik, who was a writer on Disco, and Klinzik, who did a lot of work on the X7 project at Zaum, also with work on Y12, C4, and her own personal projects. A lot of creative chops at this studio. They don't have any games announced yet, but they have several blog posts released that discuss how the studio is run and what their plans are going forward if you want to go take a look. I personally have a lot of confidence in Summer Eternal. They're past the injunction that stopped work on the studio, and from the blog posts they've released so far, they have some of the funniest and snappiest writing and some of the most politically savvy. That's a good word. Savvy. They know what they're talking about. There seems to be an actual spark of creativity in Summer Eternal from what I can see. A piece of anger against the system and shareholders and executive based on years and years of art just being punched in the fucking jaw over and over and over again by rich people. I'm really hoping, and it's a hope with a shit ton of confidence behind it, that they turn that fire into some beautiful work in the coming years. Sorry, I don't really have a ton to say about the studio itself if I'm being honest. They don't have a ton of history or controversy that I haven't already discussed, and things are very much still in the early stages over there. But based on what I've been saying thus far, no news is good news. If anyone from Summer Eternal is watching this, as I mentioned earlier, and got this far into this rambly mess of a video, keep up the good work over there. If you ask me, you guys are carrying the torch of what Disco Elysium is and should be. I can't wait to see what you're cooking up. And so to wrap things up on this stupidly long video, or the stupidly long to write video, surprisingly its length isn't actually that bad. It just the most research I've ever done for a video. We could take a lap around Zaum to see how things are going over there. Well, they officially announced Project C4 in a very lackluster trailer right around the time that the other spiritual successor projects were being announced. I have a feeling they rushed that out to try and match the hype going around. A quick look at me, look over here, we still got some things to make, we make video games too. They didn't even bother to give the game an actual name past the placeholder title, unless they plan to call it C4, which is a terrible name for a video game. Pick up the slack. Obviously, the trailer is almost 100% filled with hate comments beneath it. If you take a look, there is no gameplay, and everyone is telling them to give Disco Elysium back, which is a completely and totally fair comment to make. And speaking of Zaum having Disco Elysium, they have announced a mobile version of Disco Elysium. It was originally rumored to have existed under their project codenamed M0. See, I told you I'd get back to it. And it was Tonis Havel's idea to create an on-the-go version of Disco Elysium, tailored to captivate the TikTok user, in his own words. So, of course, it's Tonis Havel's idea. It's a bad idea. It looks more like a visual novel version of the game, slimmed down to artistic renditions of each scene rather than 3D modeled all the way through, to, assumedly, keep phones from exploding, if I had to venture a guess. The first 2 chapters of the game are going to be free, and you can purchase the full version if you want to play it all the way through. Yes, they somehow made it chapter-based, which is pretty difficult to pull off for a game like Disco Elysium. It isn't linear. You can explore things in almost any order that you want to, so it appears there's going to be some major changes to the story, or at least the streamlining of the story, for better or for worse. Probably for worse. Also, remember that Porto Showcase of X7 that I mentioned? Yeah, I mean, it got leaked on April 1st, and Zaum has been bringing down the hammer trying to cover it up. It's still pretty easy to find, as I said earlier, if you want to go look for it. I can't show more of it. I want this video to be able to stand for a while, and I'm already poking at a lot of anthills, so I can't go around doing copyright infringement on top of all of this. And that's all she wrote. Well, that's all I felt that I was necessary to include that she wrote. Obviously, I had to omit some details. If I mentioned literally everything I could find about the development of Disco Elysium and Zaum as a company, we would be here all day. And this video already took way too long to write. So, what are we supposed to take from all of this as a lesson? We could be cynics, assuming the worst of the arts industry, and decide that pure art is rare and nearly impossible to attain, and whenever it is attained, we're working on a purely temporary level. It is something to be stolen and consumed by those who view everything as a means to wealth, and you would be right if you took that cynical view. But that doesn't seem particularly useful, does it? Sure, things get fucked over and often. If this was an isolated incident to the Zaum team, it would be bad enough, but it very obviously isn't. The entire video game industry reeks of this stuff, and although I haven't done nearly as much research on other companies, judging by what I have to know about human nature, I'm assuming that the music, film, and other arts industries are probably very similar. But another thing I know about human nature is that artists really don't give a fuck and are just gonna keep making art. Yeah, you could turn over and die or refuse to make anything good ever again and assume the worst of anyone 24/7, or after something bad, you can pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get back to work making art. Disco Elysium may be gone, we may never see Harry Dubois or Kim Kitsuragi or Jean-Vic Mayer ever again, but the people who wrote these characters are still around and still kicking to make something good. Summer Eternal and Red Info both still exist, and I can't speak for the people working there, but I don't see any of them deciding to be completely done with art anytime soon. If you ask me, I'll personally still be trying to make stuff until the moment I'm 6 feet under, and I don't even have a pinky's worth of the creativity and imagination of the people who made Disco Elysium. Things will be fine. There will be more things to see of artistic value. And even if there isn't somehow, which I really doubt there won't be, you can just make your own shit. Disco Elysium lives on through the people who have played it, through the community that it has. So go make your dubiously mischaracterized, self-indulgent, terribly written fanfiction. Even if it's for no one but yourself, just go out, make weird shit, have fun with it, build communism and love and all the hippy-dippy garbage that usually doesn't work out in real life, because the whole point is trying, not actually getting there. Also, fuck the bourgeois, they are not real people. Okay, I'm completely and totally rambling at this point, so I think I'm gonna wrap up here. I'm sorry for how long this video took. I don't have the best of excuses. It probably should have been done a lot earlier. I was just not writing for a lot of days. Most days I wasn't writing. Life got genuinely fucking insane for a long time, and it's still pretty insane right now, but I'm doing better. I'm at it. It was a low point for a while, and I was balancing a lot of personal stuff and a lot of college stuff at the time of writing, but everything's all right now. I'm just looking forward to getting back to making things. I've got this idea for this thing. I'm not going to mention very many details about it. It's some live stream focused idea. It won't just be me sitting on a gaming chair playing video games and trying to be funny. I have an idea for like a neat concept that I hope you guys will like, but I don't want to share too much because I don't know how much of it is possible with the low budget that I have. Maybe I should open a page. I don't feel like I make enough to consider a Patreon at this moment. I don't know. If people think I should make a Patreon, put it in the comments. I don't like need money, but I mean, who knows? If I make one, I'll make more videos and I'll make things that'll actually make it worth it. So yeah, there you go. I have no script here right now. I'm just going off the rails. I'm really excited to see the stuff that's Summer Eternal and Red Info. And I'm not excited, but I'm interested to see what Dark Math and Long Do will make. I was really hard on them, mostly for entertainment purposes. Dark Maths looks bad. I don't know much about Hopetown. It looks like what fandom people think Disco Elysium is. Not to be offensive to fandom people. I like fandom stuff. But it's like be gay, do crimes things, and if anyone, no one knows the post I'm referencing. Okay, so yeah, but I'm officially back in the swing of things. Gonna keep writing stuff. School semester is starting up soon, so I'll have a more consistent schedule. Summertime is, I have a million billion things to do and a million different people to answer to. Not that I'm not having a good time. Doing stuff, having a lot of fun with my friends. New relationship going on, which is fantastic. My life has never been better in that department. But also, I gotta work on things. Gotta make videos, gotta make art. I'm gonna start working on some more music stuff too. That new project, that ought to be good. Probably need some more video essays. Some of my friends have given me some pretty good ideas. People mention things in the comments that I'm interested in. There's some other things in the backlog that I'm interested in doing. So yeah, I'll see you all later. Here's hoping that everyone at every company learned all of their lessons and video game industry will never do anything bad like that ever again. Oh, God fucking damn it.